All right, what's going on? Drive time Tuesday afternoon, 9 minutes past the hour, 2 o'clock. I think it's officially the dog days of summer. It's like 98 degrees. I am sweating, even though I'm in a dark cave of a radio studio. It is very hot outside, but as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic, Porter Larson behind the glass. We got a jam-packed, busy Tuesday show for you guys as NBA free agency continues to roll along. We'll talk about what could be next with the Utah Jazz after moving on from Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson. And we'll give you the up-to-date news cycle on what's happened since you and I last spoke and said goodnight last night at 6 o'clock. It's been a busy 48 hours in the world of pro basketball. And today is the start of free agency in the NHL. And the Utah Hockey Club, the Utah Mammoth, we'll get there. They've made some moves. We'll tell you about it, tell you about some of the new players, and keep you up to date on any of the movement around the NHL of note. There will not be as much NHL movement as there is in the NBA. Just the leagues are very different that way. But Bill Armstrong and his staff, Austin Ainge, his staff, busy right now working the phones to see what sort of pieces to the puzzle they can put together. Or, in the Jazz case, puzzle might be complete. We might not see anything else from the Jazz. I'll tell you why. We'll get into it coming up in just a little bit. The latest down at BYU with the Jake Retzlaff situation. We got a good college football guest on the show today. RSL with a weekend clash taking on St. Louis. The Royals will be taking on Orlando. That's going to be on Friday. So, busy week, a couple of weeks away from the official start of training camp in the world of professional football. Not a lot of news that way in the NFL, as this is kind of the quiet time for both pro and college football. We will be in Dallas, Texas next week for Big 12 Media Day. Myself and Sean will have that for you, the great OC. We will be doing a couple of straight days of about 6 or 7 hours of radio together. It should be fun, kind of the unofficial start of the college football season. So stay tuned. That comes your way coming up next week. So busy Tuesday show. Good to have you guys with us. We'll start things off today with Kyle Bonagura. Kyle covers college football for ESPN, does a little soccer from time to time, but right now, mostly college football. Kyle was one of the ESPN writers who wrote the piece on Jake Retzlaff that came out with Pete Thamel yesterday. So we'll talk about the situation down at BYU. We'll do some Big 12 football, talk some Utah football, some offseason stuff. With Kyle Bonagura from ESPN right out of the gates. Going to bring in Tim McMahon, NBA Daily Assist style. Several teams in the West making forward-facing moves, taking steps in the right direction, namely the Houston Rockets. Go off, Houston. They're getting everybody. Denver made a couple of moves that I like. We'll talk about the Nuggets move. San Antonio making some moves as well. So there are some teams in the West trying to make progress moving forward. Out east, Quinn Snyder's Atlanta Hawks suddenly might have something to say about the Eastern Conference next year. Milwaukee is very much not acting like a team that's going to trade Giannis Antetokounmpo, but they did stretch and waive Dame Lillard. We'll kind of explain that scenario to you. On the surface, optically, it's not a great look for a Hall of Fame player and one of my favorite NBA players of this generation. Utah's very own Damian Lillard played his college basketball up here. But if you're Dame, it's actually not bad news. We'll tell you why. We'll go over the details, what a stretch provision is, what it means for Damian Lillard. Essentially, he's going to get his money, and he's going to be able to pick his final destination and finish his career as a pro basketball player. So when you see the headline, you're like, wait, Damian Lillard gets cut? What are you talking about? Well, there could be a scenario at play here where this was a mutual deal. We'll talk to Tim McMahon about it today. He's going to join us. We'll do some jazz with Tim as well. Our guy, Richard Smith, who was part of our draft coverage last week, will be live in studio for an entire hour. And our friend Sarah Todd from the Deseret News also stops by. Former University of Utah basketball player gets paid big-time cash. We'll talk about that, too. Kyle Bonagura, Tim McMahon, Richard Smith, Sarah Todd, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners. And that guy who once upon a time got dunked on by Damian Lillard.
Hey, now.
When you see the headline, you just go, wait a second. That's wild. But ultimately, when you dig into it, this is not, at the end of the day, it will not be bad news for Dame. It won't.
No, and I don't know that it's necessarily bad news for Milwaukee, right? I think they're just at a different place right now. And Damian Lillard's focusing on one thing, and that's his Achilles at the moment. So a guy who's in the later stages of his career, Spence, and probably has, if we're being completely honest, like one go at it, post-Achilles guard who already isn't an oversized guard. He's not a guy who moves laterally much better than a lot of guards in the league. So this is something where, he's going to have kind of one chance to find a good landing spot and have hopefully a little last stand as a scoring guard, maybe a number one option. I don't know. Offensively, at least, could still be a really, really good piece. And I'm excited to see where he lands. It'll be interesting.
It will, and we'll see what's next in Milwaukee. They made a couple of different moves, so we'll discuss all the NBA free agency, the NBA offseason through the prism of the Utah Jazz in the Western Conference with some good basketball guests today. We'll give you an update on the Utah Mammoths' first day in NHL free agency. They've signed a defenseman to a 3-year deal. We'll tell you about him. They've actually made a couple of different moves throughout the course of today, so we'll keep you up to date on all of this. On a busy Tuesday show, our first guest will be Kyle Bonagura. But before Kyle rolls by, courtesy of our good friends, your good friends too at Prize Picks, it is time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN 700 and run your game with Prize Picks.
If you download that Prize Picks app today, use that promo code ESPN700. They're going to hook you up with $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. You do not even have to win the $5 lineup that you play. The $50 is guaranteed. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700, and they'll hook you up with $50 when you play that first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game all season long. All right, let's start here. It doesn't make any sense for either the Utah Jazz or Damian Lillard for the Jazz to make a play for Dame. It really doesn't when you look at it from a couple of different perspectives and angles. What do you bring him in on a 1-year deal and just kind of let him rehab in state? I think with what we've seen, the Jazz electing to move on from Colin Sexton. They trade Colin Sexton to the Charlotte Hornets. They had to attach a second-round pick to Colin to get that transaction done. And ultimately, they bring in a player with zero value. I don't think once upon a time I would have said that about Yusuf Nurkic, but I certainly would say that right now. And surprised that they actually had to attach the pick to Colin to get the transaction done. But what that does ultimately is give you an idea of what the market is now and has been for Colin. Because if we're honest, whether it's Colin Sexton, who they traded to Charlotte, or Jordan Clarkson, who they essentially cut, it was a buyout, and when you look at the details of the buyout, it saved the Jazz a little bit of money, but ultimately they cut him. And that says that the market over the past few years has just been non-existent, right? Because we've been waiting to see whether it was Colin, whether it was Clarkson, whether it was John Collins, or even a player like Lauri Markkanen, who I still feel like is going to be here for a while. We'll get into some of that a little bit later on. If Justin Zanuck or Danny Ainge at the time, the guys making the decision prior to Austin's arrival, I think if they were able even to get like a salary match and a second-round pick for either player, they would have done that deal. Now, a couple of years ago, after the decision was made to break down the Gobert, Mitchell, Dennis Lindsey, Quinn Snyder 9-year iteration of Jazz basketball, the conversation turned from, okay, moved on from Donovan, moved on from Rudy, moved on from Bogdanovich, moved on from Mike Conley. Okay, you got rid of all these players. What does this mean for Jordan Clarkson? And then after Colin Sexton is acquired via the Mitchell deal, the conversation kind of turned into, okay, what does it mean for Colin? Because it felt like those two would have had some market value. They moved off of Ochai Agbaji really quick, who, by the way, played pretty well in Toronto last year. Some of the other pieces, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who ironically enough is going to Atlanta, where he'll play for Quinn. And when Quinn had Nickeil Alexander-Walker here, he couldn't get off the bench. And I actually thought Alexander-Walker was a better player than Royce O'Neal, who Quinn preferred. I never really knew why. So kind of an interesting non sequitur storyline that's a reunion of a coach and a player that didn't seem to really get much going when they were together prior to. But ultimately, when you see what's happened here, I did mention this after Austin Ainge took the job, okay? And I don't know if there's anything here, but if you're a Jazz fan, you've heard a lot of, Jazz coaches, Jazz players, people that work for the Jazz, just applaud Jordan Clarkson for the way he handled himself off the court. He did become kind of like this leader. I believe it's painted in the locker room, lead with love or show love or whatever Jordan's thing is. And then you have Will Hardy wearing a hat that says show love at a press conference. That was Clarkson's thing. And throughout the course of the worst stretch in the history of this organization under this ownership group, I think things like that actually endeared Jordan to the community. And he deserves that, deserves those flowers, as the kids would say. Now, unfortunately, the reality is over the past couple of years, he has not been near the player that he was when he played for Quinn and won Sixth Man of the Year. You know, one of the coolest moments of that stretch of Jazz basketball was Joe Ingles and Jordan Clarkson were two finalists for Sixth Man of the Year a number of years ago. And they had this cool moment where Joe and Jordan were on television. I think it was Turner after a game. And they asked the trivia question, how many players in Jazz history have won Sixth Man of the Year? And Jordan said no. And then Joe held up his finger and said, no, it's actually one. And they announced that Jordan had won it. It was a really cool thing, really cool moment. So there kind of is this sentiment across the market that a lot of people are sad to see Jordan go on his way, because I think he has meant a lot to a lot of people here throughout the course of a really clunky rebuild that's only led to mediocrity at best and pathetic play at worst. Jordan was kind of the vibe guy that kept things going. So sad to see him go, but the reality is over the past couple of years, he has been barely an average player, barely a rotational player for a team that's actually trying to win. And Jordan will now land in New York, right? And he's going to play for the Knicks. And it'll be interesting to see, because the Knicks did rely for their second team offensive attack last year. They didn't have a ton of punch off the bench. I don't know if you noticed, Tom Thibodeau didn't play anybody. The Deuce McBride kid's a nice young player, but maybe Clarkson can step in there. And for a team that's actually trying to win in an Eastern Conference that's very fluid next year, I would imagine Jordan could play a role. But if the past 2 years are any indication of who Jordan Clarkson is now as an NBA player, I'm not sure that that's a huge loss for the Jazz on the floor. Okay, so ultimately what this does, okay, it does one thing. So back to the Austin Ainge dynamic, who did not acquire any of these players prior to this draft cycle, was not a part of drafting any of these players. I just would imagine Austin Ainge is wired a little bit like his dad, where he just removes emotion from decision-making and doesn't give a rip about players that he has not acquired, now that the owner himself, Ryan Smith, has let us all know that he is the primary decision-maker. So I just have to wonder whether it was Justin Zanuck, who was part of the trade, which, by the way, the Clarkson trade, in retrospect, was a great deal by the Jazz. They traded Dante Exum and I think 2 second-rounders for Clarkson, who stepped in here and became one of, if not the best bench player in the history of Jazz basketball, all due respect to our guy, Big T. Thurl Bailey. So an excellent transaction, and part of me wonders if Zanuck or Danny Ainge was a little bit more, I'm going to use the term loyal, but I don't want that to sound like I'm knocking on Austin for not being loyal. My point is Austin just doesn't give a rip because he didn't acquire these players. He's new. Okay, so he's looking at this roster maybe a little bit the same way Dennis Lindsay looked at it when he took the job, as kind of a blank canvas where he can draw his own painting. He can paint his own creation. So I wonder if Danny and Justin were a little bit too stubborn in their asks for either Colin Sexton or Jordan Clarkson, because what the transactions have indicated is there was no market for these two players at all. You had to attach a future second-round pick. And is that a huge asset? Probably not, but if you can grab a second-round pick, it gives you another bite of the apple. And if you knock it out of the park the way certain second-round picks have been knocked out of the park, namely the best basketball player on the planet right now, Nikola Jokic, then you look back at that risk and you're like, man, you really had to give up a second-round pick just to get off of Clarkson. And your quote-unquote reward is a player in Yusuf Nurkic that is basically a net negative. He's a veteran backup center that I suppose can provide some physicality and practice to Walker Kessler. He also is on an expiring deal, though expiring contracts don't have the value they once did. So maybe you can move Nurkic at the deadline. The net of what I'm talking about is simply this. I don't know what else the Jazz are going to do this offseason. I think there's potential, because I do think John Collins, and if we're honest about John Collins, he is coming off a career year, okay? So if you're a team like the Lakers, if you are a team that has kind of been passed by some of your other conference peers, you could do worse than John Collins. The problem is $26.5 million, got to match that salary coming back, and you got to figure out what that looks like. And there is a world that exists that John Collins is kind of like a guy that you do want to pay because you do have to meet a salary floor in the NBA. Everybody talks about the second apron, the salary cap, where you can't go over certain numbers because it's punitive in a way that we've seen a lot of roster movement. You also have to meet a salary floor, okay? So you have to pay somebody. And maybe that somebody is John Collins. My point is there's a chance that if you pull up the Jazz depth chart right now, this is your team. And this is who we're going to see next year. And that's okay. Because as we've discussed and as we will continue to cover, the Jazz have a draft pick next year that is top 8 protected. And if they're out of the top 8, it goes to Oklahoma City. And at this stage in your roster construction, when next year's draft is thought to be a place where maybe 4 or 5 franchise-changing pieces exist, you have to hold on to that asset. It would be malfeasance if you elected to go all in on trying to be mediocre and suddenly you fall to 9, 10, or 11, and that pick goes to the defending world champs. It would be a horrible way to approach this. So I know a lot of Jazz fans are seeing all this player movement and going, wait a second, how do we get involved here? There are good players on the move. Why aren't we acquiring any of them? Well, the main reason is, as Austin Ainge said, they're not going to manipulate minutes to tank or try to lose games, but there's a way to do that in the NBA without being obvious about it, so you're not fined by the league when you sit healthy veteran players. And it's very simple. You're going to see a lot of Isaiah Collier. You're going to see a lot of Keontae George. This is a big year for Keontae specifically. You're going to see Bryce Sensabaugh. You're going to see Walt Clayton Jr. You're going to see Ace Bailey. You're going to see Taylor Hendricks. You're going to see Walker Kessler, Kyle Filipowski, etc. You are going to see these pups play. Now, last year they fed us the BS line, pups can't raise pups. Well, guess what? Pups are raising pups. That kennel is full of children. And hopefully some of them provide steps forward and provide hope for what this team can look like in 3 or 4 years. Because, guys, the reality is that's how long this is going to take before they're even kind of good. All right, we'll switch gears. Kyle Bonnegar is going to join us coming up next. The latest on the BYU situation with Jake Retzlaff. Big 12 Media Day next week in Dallas, some Utah football. Tim McMahon, Richard Smith, Sarah Todd. Big show on a Tuesday afternoon, and it's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. We got Big 12 football media days next week in Dallas, Texas. We'll be down there as your home of the Utes. Myself and Sean O'Connell will have you taken care of. We'll do back-to-back days of like 7 hours of radio. So it should be a good time. It's kind of the unofficial start of the college football calendar for the University of Utah. Our next guest covers college football and some other things, but we'll do mostly football today. Our buddy Kyle Bonagura from ESPN on a Tuesday. Kyle, happy Tuesday, man. What's going on?
Doing good, Spence. Enjoying summer and kind of gearing up for the season, talking season starting soon, I guess, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So the big news around here over the past number of weeks, but a different kind of tone and tenor and direction as a judge has granted a joint motion from BYU quarterback Jake Retzlaff and his accuser to dismiss the civil suit against him. You and Pete Thamel doing a great job, as always, covering this. In addition, Jake has told his coaches and teammates he is now looking for a new place to play as a result of facing a 7-game suspension. Just kind of unpack your thoughts on this whole thing, the whole process, and what you think comes next.
Yeah, I mean, it's really complex, right? It's sensitive, it's complex. There's a lot of moving pieces here. For college football fans, like the bottom line, kind of where we kind of left off here, this week is that Jake Retzlaff and, like you said, the woman who accused him of rape, their case was dismissed. What the indication is that there was probably some sort of a settlement, and they agreed to kind of go their separate ways. And so what for Retzlaff this means is that as part of his defense, and maybe you guys have talked about this, is that he admitted to, his defense was that the encounter was consensual sex, which of course is a violation of BYU's honor code. We've seen a number of cases or instances in the past where, athletes, admitted to having sex and were forced into a suspension or kicked off the team. So as soon as this was, I guess, last Friday when that defense publicly surfaced, I think it was pretty easy to kind of see that a suspension was coming. And I was able to confirm that 7 games was the expectation. And for Jake, facing a 7-game suspension in his final year of eligibility, a year that he hoped to develop into an NFL prospect, I think made the decision pretty easy to ask to decide to transfer from BYU. And now we'll see where he ends up, right? There's a stigma now attached to him as a result of the accusations, right? And so we'll kind of see where that goes. I think we'll have a pretty good sense in the next week or two where he winds up, and I do expect him to find a home before the season begins.
So I am not a lawyer, and Kyle, unless I am mistaken, neither are you, correct?
Yeah, I just spend too much time reading legal filings without the education to make sense of them completely.
For sure. But I'll ask, and if there's not much here, we can just move in another direction. Maybe you can enlighten us on how this process kind of played out. Lawsuit filed, okay, that we had you on pretty quick after that because the details that you guys were reporting on at BYU as far as her accusations were, they were horrible. And then Retzlaff is an attorney, and his attorney, they filed kind of their side of things, and they were very adamant that this was consensual, and that included some pretty heavy language in the direction of this young lady as well. And then we have this situation where, again, it's kind of assumed that a settlement was reached, but we don't have any information in that direction. Now the judge is signing this to kind of just dismiss the whole thing. Can you enlighten us on kind of how this process works and how they kind of came to this resolution, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think you can and the process is pretty similar, not with just this case in particular, but like all civil cases that are similar, right? They all follow a very similar kind of order of events, right? The complaint is filed by the accusing party. She remains nameless. Then you have a certain amount of days to reply, right? And so I don't know what the exact number is, but that period of time is 30, 60 days or some period, within those parameters. That's what happened last week. So Jake's hires an attorney. They file a response to why they think it should be dismissed or here's their defense. That's all standard, right? And when you're talking about civil cases, it can go a number of ways, right? It can be flat out dismissed by a judge, like, hey, on its merits, we don't see anything here. There's not enough to proceed. It can go to trial, right? You all move forward, and that could take a couple of years to wind through the court system to a point where we actually have a jury trial. That was the demand, the quote unquote demand in the original complaint, which is all standard. And the third, like really common door to go through is a settlement, right? And I think that based on the language that was included in the joint motion to dismiss, it's hard to come up with any other scenario to why they would have filed that unless they had come to some sort of a settlement, likely a financial settlement. And the territory you start treading into there is like in those cases, both parties agree not to ever discuss it, right? It would violate the terms of the agreement. So the woman and her legal team are not allowed to discuss it. I'm sure there's some sort of financial penalties if they were to do so. And I think it's probably the same on the other side where Jake or his legal team is also not at liberty to discuss the numbers, right? And so it's easy to make the assumption. I think anyone understands that's probably what took place based on how everything unfolded. But there's just not going to be any more details just because of the way those things are structured.
Any insight at all? And I'm just asking because I honestly don't know. I mean, if you read the tea leaves, BYU, the institution, must have read Jake's court filing and what he had to say about, the events that took place. And when he admitted to consensual premarital sex, I just am assuming that that's when the punishment came down and it was going to be 7 games. Is that just a safe way to assume how this went?
Yeah, so I can say that in talking with sources during the reporting process, I know that Jake met with the school prior to the reply last week being filed. So BYU was not caught off guard by what was outlined in the reply, where he admitted publicly that this, his stance publicly was that the sex was consensual. So by the time Friday rolled around, the university had already been able to discuss internally what the appropriate punishment should be, and how they settled on 7 games. It feels a little arbitrary to me, but I don't have a great sense of how they determined that was the number. But it was relayed to him last week, I believe on Friday, that the number would be 7. And at that point, I think it was a very easy decision for him to move on. And I don't think he was caught off guard by it either, right? The precedent is there at BYU that this stuff this is how they deal with it there. There's the honor code that you kind of, we can have a longer conversation about the merits of it, but that's what you sign up for when you go to that school. And so you kind of have to live with the consequences if you break the honor code. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, and the problem, and I've said this, quite frankly, I said it when the story came out. I've been doing radio in this market coming up this fall. It'll be 20 years. And my most unfavorite things to cover are BYU honor code violations from players when things like this take place, because there are so many angles where you feel, at least I feel, that you need to be fair to everybody involved. And, the community of people that decide to go online and take victory laps if you're a Utah fan, or accuse this woman of extorting or lying if you're a BYU fan. The whole thing feels really gross to me, Kyle. I don't enjoy it. But to your point about having a bigger conversation about whether or not the honor code is antiquated, whether or not it needs to be adjusted, I find that to be a moot point. You know what you get into when you go down there. I had 5 siblings that went to BYU. I mean, and there's no ambiguity, by the way. There's no gray area. If you're going to go there, you're expected to behave a certain way. And if you don't, you need to understand things like this could happen. And to me, that's just kind of the bottom line.
Yeah, no, I think it's very clear, right? And that's why I don't think he was surprised that there was a suspension. I mean, he's a starting quarterback for a program with very high aspirations this coming year, and that didn't matter, right? I mean, we saw it however many years ago with Brandon Davies, getting suspended when the basketball team was 27-2 and ranked number 2 in the country, right? That's how it works there. And so you have to kind of accept it if you're going to play there. It does complicate things, though. That he's not Mormon, right? That he is, he had BYU trademarked last year because it was such a unique, dynamic for it to have a Jewish starting quarterback at BYU for the first time ever. It was, interesting if nothing else. And so the fact that he's, not of that faith, but, is being punished for, the beliefs of that religion is also like a very interesting conversation, right? It's not football related at all. It's society and it's everything that goes into that. But from a college football standpoint, it would have been very easy to avoid this scenario if you were Jake Retzloff, and now he's just got to deal with it.
I wonder how, and this is where we get into this like slippery slope with this conversation. Because out here we're used to this, and certainly whether you're a member of the LDS Church or not, if you live in this state, you have to find a way to exist in the ecosystem that's dominated on every level of state by the religion that essentially, settled here hundreds of years ago. So out here, something like this goes down, kind of like, yeah, that's the BYU experience. I wonder how you would articulate the reaction from somebody who's an outsider looking in. And look, you've covered BYU, and maybe you're the wrong guy to ask this because you are familiar with Salt Lake. You've covered Utah in the Pac-12, and you've covered BYU stories. But when something like this happens, how do you think it's kind of digested and optically it looks from the outside looking in from somebody who may not be familiar with how this stuff works?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, I'll just say none of this kind of caught me off guard. I've been around it enough to have understand kind of the state of play for the most part. So I feel like I have a decent understanding for being an outsider. But imagine telling someone this in the South, right? Like the college football quarterback, your quarterback is suspended because he had sex, had premarital sex. It's insane. I think there's an expectation that he's the quarterback of a ranked college football team that is challenging for, conference titles. There's a perception of what that individual social life might be, right? That comes with being a high profile athlete in college sports, especially the quarterback, right? And so if anything, I think you would have a lot of people surprised if the starting quarterback wasn't having sex, right? That's just the reality of what the perception is nationally about that position. But again, so I think, there's some people that, of course, are not going to agree with it, and they're going to think it's weird, and that's just the way it is, right? There's no other way to explain it, right? There's just cultural differences, and in the United States, there's so many different subcultures that are so different, and college football has a way of bringing them all together, which I think most of the time is actually a really good thing, and exposes you to different backgrounds in areas of the country, which mixes them all together. But certainly, you're going to have this. You're going to have some shock at times when stuff like this plays out. Do
you think there's anything about this? And again, just covering this whole thing and trying to talk about it appropriately and cover all sides of it appropriately continues to feel weird. And the fact of the matter is, Kyle, as you know, ever since NIL became a reality, BYU has been able to recruit at a very high level. Their 2026 class, as a result of another commit, is currently top 25 according to the ESPN rankings. They've got the best college basketball freshmen in America playing in Provo next year. So the weird kind of dichotomy here is on one side, they've been able to find this lane with deep-pocketed donors writing big-time checks to pay what you need to pay to attract talent. Do you think something like this with the Jake stuff could have an adverse effect on the program when people kind of dig into it and, to your point, might look at this as antiquated or weird?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think if you put yourself in the shoes of a bunch of 18-year-old kids, right, there are some of them who are not going to want to go into that sort of environment. That's just the reality of it, right? And so but I think that was the case before. This is just the most recent example of hey, it's front and center. It kind of refreshes the idea of hey, this is kind of the environment that you're signing up for. And it's going to, some people are going to shy away from it. But I do think that BYU has benefited as much as anyone in college athletics by the way things have developed from an NIL standpoint. I mean, look at basketball, look at football, I talked to some people over at BYU, and they see it as, BYU is the church is very sees this as an opportunity to help the church, right? Because the more high profile BYU athletics is, the more front and center the LDS religion is, right? That's just, it's pure marketing, right? And so there's an investment into football that benefits the church in that way. There's just look, you also want to be successful in sports. This is an opportunity. There's a lot of money there that can be used and is being used to to help fund these programs. And so, yeah, I think like on balance, BYU is benefiting from this, but certainly like this event is going to have negative repercussions as well. But the long term, I think they'll be all right.
So it does come after a season where BYU caught a lot of people off guard with how well they played. And, interestingly enough, and we've talked about this, so we don't need to look back on it, but the 2 games they lost, like they weren't that far off from having like an extraordinary season, cracking a CFP or what have you, but they stumble down the stretch at home to Kansas, and then they lose a absolute dogfight to Arizona State. They beat Colorado in the Alamo Bowl. They go 11-2. So now we move over to what could be next for them. The interesting thing is Jake was 11th in the Big 12 in QBR. Oftentimes they were able to win in spite of some really bad decisions he made. So when you look at, the quarterback room, McKay Hillstead is a Utah State transfer, Trayson Bourgain, Bear Bachmeyer. I don't know who's going to get the job. But the football takeaway, as we awkwardly now make this a football topic because it's just so weird to talk about all this stuff, what do you think this means for BYU football this year in the Big 12?
Yeah, so it's hard to say, right? Because we just don't know how good the other quarterbacks will be. And it's like as good as Retzloff was, he wasn't setting the world on fire. I think he was a competent quarterback who didn't lose games, and that's actually like a really valuable asset to have, right? Like he made some mistakes at times and wasn't perfect, and showed flashes at times where I thought he was really good. I think there was a lot of a stock being put into him coming back as the starter, right? And not being the same quarterback that he was last year, and being able to have that year of starting experience under his belt, where now he's able to kind of make the next step and be a more just be a better player, right? With him gone, that it's a complete unknown. I mean, I think LJ Martin is actually a pretty good back. I think he's progressed pretty well over the last 2 years. So I think a lot more will be put on him than probably would have been expected if Retzloff was coming back. But yeah, it's a complete unknown with who the other quarterbacks are. You got 3 different transfers. So we'll see. I still think, this is a team that won with defense last year, right? They had the best defense in the Big 12, if I'm not mistaken, statistically. If not, one of the best in the country, really. And so when you're making your money that way, I think a lot of that is schematically they're very sound, and they've got some really important players to replace. But at the same time, there's enough coming back to where I think the expectations of the defense should still be very good. So with all those factors, I still think BYU will head into this year with really high expectations. And we've talked about this in the past, Spence. It's just so hard to predict college football now with all the roster turnover. Yeah, there's a lot reading the tea leaves. They should still be pretty good, but they were expected to come 13th in the conference last year and almost won it. So what do we know? Not a lot, I guess.
And that's the problem. I mean, now I want to ask you about your thoughts on the Big 12, but it is July 1st, and I would imagine that you've read some of the same predictions I've read. Phil Steele came out with his annual. He's got Baylor winning the conference, Utah at 2. There are a lot of preseason predictions that have Utah in the area of 4 to 7. I think a lot of people are curious about Texas Tech with the money they've spent. Then there's the stalwarts, K-State, Iowa State. Obviously, we have to talk about Kenny Dillingham and the team that won the conference a year ago. But on July 1st, Kyle, what's your gut tell you about this conference? It just seems to cannibalize itself just like the Pac-12 used to.
Yeah, I was actually going to make the Pac-12 comparison as you're kind of reading those lists off. You can make the case for all those teams and feel pretty good about it, right? And I think that's actually why I really like the Big 12, and it's really an interesting conference to start paying more attention to because it is wide open. There isn't the established powers. I like the parity, and it's not necessarily great for national prominence not to have just a bell cow at the top you can rely on to be a top 5 or whatever. But Arizona State was a great story last year. They were, I think, picked to come second to last in the conference and to go to the playoff, and showed well, I thought, in the playoff. I think ASU, for me, they're interesting. Of course, they've got a lot of production to replace. But then the most intriguing team, I think, has to be Texas Tech, because in this era of college football, money matters, right? If you look at salary caps, unsalary cap sports, the teams with the highest payrolls are usually the best teams. It's a really easy correlation to make. You have the most money, you get the best players, Texas Tech is that team. Like we've seen reports that, maybe $30-40 million on their roster, and whatever the exact number is doesn't really matter. Like the takeaway is it's a lot, and it's more than most other programs, not just in the Big 12, but it's among the elite spenders in college football. So that's gonna help you out. The scheme and all that stuff matters too, but the talent at the end of the day is the most important aspect of winning football games. And so for me, I would probably pick Texas Tech as the favorite, and then confidence level in that, like not a lot, because again, this is just so hard to predict.
All right, before I set you loose, let's talk about and unpack what you wrote concerning, and thank you for not writing about Bill Belichick and Jordan Hudson. I don't really need to read about that anymore, but you did write about Bill Belichick, obviously no longer in pro football. He's moved to the college ranks of Carolina, and you wrote about a coach that people around here know, of course, and Bill Walsh, and kind of drew a parallel between how this could look for Belichick. So I want you to unpack what you wrote, and then I'm wondering if you think we will see more coaches maybe try this path if the NFL door closes now that things are a little bit different in the college game that feels a little bit more professional.
Yeah, so it's the short result. First of all, a lot of fun to report. I grew up in the Bay Area, as you know, and followed the 49ers dynasty and all of that. Bill Walsh is just a kind of a legend. I mean, he's a legend everywhere, but certainly here in the Bay Area. And so to have a chance to talk with a bunch of coaches and players who were on his Stanford team in '92 was just a fun assignment for me to do. It's the parallels are pretty cool. It's this guy who oversaw a dynasty, coached the best quarterback in the NFL history at that point in Joe Montana. Steps aside, reasons are different, and then decides he wants to get back into coaching and returns to college football. He had been the coach at Stanford before, so it's not the same as Belichick going to the college game for the first time. But it is the same that you have the guy who's essentially the defining genius of the sport schematically at the time, becoming a college football coach and trying to, reverse engineer what he did in the NFL for the college level. They had a really good year in '92. They finished ranked in the top 10, which is obviously very difficult to do at Stanford. I have a lot of really good anecdotes and stories in my piece that published today. Tom Holmoe, just obviously stepped down as the AD at BYU recently. Had a few of those. I mean, he talked about getting a call from Walsh, who he played for with the 49ers. He had just finished 2 years as a grad assistant at BYU. He's trying to break into the next stage of his life, and Walsh calls the BYU facility in 1990, at the end of 91 or early 92, maybe January of 92, tells Tom, hey, I'm going to Stanford and you're coming with me, something like that, right? And Tom's like, okay, great. He calls his wife and she's asking him all sorts of questions, like how much are you getting paid? What position are you coaching? All these things. And he's like, I don't know. I have no idea. I didn't ask him any of those questions, but it's Bill Walsh. It's my first job, first full-time job, after playing pro football. I'm going to take it. He tells another story about going down to Louisiana on a recruiting trip with Walsh. And it's the small town in Louisiana. They're after this big-time defensive back. And the high school coach parades them around town, stopping by all the establishments, eventually takes them to a restaurant for dinner that night. They're sitting at this long dining table, and it's roped off. And so they sit down for dinner, and the restaurant fills up with people. There's people standing 5 deep in the restaurant just to watch Bill Walsh have dinner at this small town in Louisiana with Tom Holmoe next to him as this rookie college football assistant coach. There's a bunch of other stuff that's really fun and cool. So I would encourage people to go check that out. It's up on ESPN.com right now.
Well, good stuff as always, Kyle. Thanks for the time today, man. Have a good week. All right.
Sure thing. All right. See you.
All right. Kyle Bonagura covers college football for ESPN. Consistent guest on the show. At Bonagura ESPN is where you find him on social media. We'll catch our final break at the 2 o'clock hour. 1 hour in the books, 3 hours to go. Tim McMahon is our guest coming up on the other side. Richard Smith, Sarah Todd, busy show the rest of the way on a Tuesday drive right here on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. Day 2, NBA free agency. Nothing today regarding the Utah Jazz, at least officially, but my goodness, a lot of movement. A lot of movement. Our next guest joins us on a weekly basis. Hoop Collective, ESPN, our guy, Tim McMahon. Tim, happy Tuesday, man. How we doing?
Hey, partner, doing all right. How about you?
We're good. We're good. I guess we found out what the market is for Colin Sexton is, yeah?
Yeah, that I would say was a rather underwhelming trade for the Jazz. Having to give up a second-round pick along with Colin Sexton to get a big man who's bounced around the league, less than ideal, but I do think that it accomplishes a couple goals for the Jazz, and that would be one, open up minutes for their young guards, and two, to put a product on the floor next year that's going to protect their top 8 protected pick.
And in addition, they essentially waived Jordan Clarkson. It was technically a buyout, and the buyout saved the Jazz a little bit of cash. And then Jordan, according to you guys over at ESPN, plans to sign with the Knicks when he clears waivers. And for the past couple of years, everybody around here loves him, as you know, but he's just not the player that he was when he won Sixth Man of the Year under Quinn, because none of us are as young as we used to be. So your thoughts on the decision to move on from Jordan Clarkson?
Yeah, and look, man, Clarkson had to basically sit out last season. I think that it was the right thing to do to let him get to a competitive situation. Clearly, if there was a robust trade market for him, he would have been gone already. So instead of letting that drag out, they let him go before free agency got started, and he found a home in New York, and it's the first clutch client to go to the Knicks in quite some time. Honestly, if there's a surprise involved, it's that the Knicks took on a clutch client, but hopefully Clarkson can go there, and obviously he'll have a limited role off the bench, but hopefully he can give him a little jolt of some offense off the bench, and it's a good situation for all involved, but him sticking around in Utah for another year just didn't make sense for anybody.
Do you have accurate frame of reference? It's interesting because Jordan is the longest tenured Jazz man and the only holdover from the Dennis Lindsey Quinn Snyder group. And it seems like throughout this 4-year pivot, rebuild, wins and losses, it's the worst that it's ever been around here. He's kind of been the locker room vibe guy. It feels like a lot of people are actually pretty sad to see him go. Do you have any context or frame of reference for what he's meant to that organization?
I mean, finding somebody who's interacted with Jordan Clarkson who doesn't like the guy.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, he's just, he is. Vibes is the right word. And he's also part of one of the funnier Will Hardy stories that I can recall. And that's, Will Hardy comes in, obviously it's his first head coaching job, and he's got some basic rules that he wants to instill. And one of those rules is no jewelry at practice. And then Jordan Clarkson shows up, and he's got diamonds embedded in his teeth. And, Will had to kind of think about that. And he's like, is that jewelry? Is that a violation of the rule? And then he just decided not to enforce no jewelry at practice rule quite as hard.
Yeah, and it's just been interesting to see, the social reaction and talk to a lot of people that kind of felt like this was the end of an era because he was the only holdover. But it's been a minute since we've had you on, so we get to talk to you about a couple of different Jazz topics that have already gone down, and that is namely Ace Bailey was the selection at 5. And, a lot of reporting, and I certainly can't corroborate any of it, that maybe Ace's camp did not prefer Utah. There was and we had your buddy Tim Bontemps on yesterday, so we unpacked this stuff. There was a report from Tim and others at ESPN that his camp had told somebody in the top 5 not to draft him. Clearly, it wasn't the Jazz. I thought actually we'll get to Walt Clayton Jr. in a minute. But Austin Ainge, I kind of I don't know if this is the dynamic, but whether or not Ace wanted to be here, Austin just said, well, we think you're the best player, so we're taking you. He reported on time. He could not have been better for the presser, and he is ready to go. So your thoughts on the Jazz taking Ace Bailey at 5?
I mean, listen, the indications certainly were that he would prefer to go to Washington. He did not send out the message that he was good with going to Utah. I think the communication after the pick was very spotty, to put it politely, for a little bit there. But to your point, he showed up. He showed up ready to work, and it seems to me that he's gotten over wanting to kind of choose his destination in the draft, which is just not the way the draft works. He's going to get plenty. Like, listen, if he wants to be a star, he's going to have that opportunity in Utah. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for him, to get shots, to have the ball in his hands, to be developed. And so, life could be a lot worse. I think this is actually a really good situation for him. And he didn't show up pouting. He didn't show up whining and crying or anything like that. Like I said, seems like whatever disappointment there might have been on his end, he got over it, and he showed up ready to go to work and ready to be a pro. And that's all you can ask. I think at some point he's going to have to really consider who he's listening to for advice and what their credentials are. It's very easy to be a teenage kid and have the wrong people in your ear and get steered down the wrong path. So hopefully he's going to be able to evaluate that and make some clear-headed decisions about what voices he's valuing that are in his ear and move forward. But, hey, showed up, ready to go to work, and looking forward to seeing him in the Salt Lake City Summer League. Yeah,
good point about the reps, and I've been very adamant to remind the listeners that this is an 18-year-old young man who is surrounded by people who appear to have never done this job before, so they're also learning on the fly. One follow-up, have you been able to kind of learn the reasoning that he canceled all of his workouts? I mean, typically your antenna goes up and you think, okay, he's been promised. And then he cancels Philly, and you're like, wait, he hasn't been promised a 1 or 2. So maybe Washington did have their eyes on him, and maybe they take him at 6 if the Jazz don't take him at 5. But have you been able to learn why Ace canceled all of his workouts?
I don't have direct information, but I can tell you the belief throughout the league is that he wanted to go to Washington, and Washington wanted him to go there.
Gotcha.
So, take that for what it's worth. Like I said, I can't sit here and tell you absolutely positively that's 100% true. I can just tell you that's what people around the league believe to be true.
So I'm a little conflicted here because if Walt, and by the way, it's Walt. He told us his introductory press conference. It's not Walter. He wants us to call him Walt, so I'll call him what he wants us to call him. Like, if Austin Ainge and the Jazz staff identified him as their guy, go get him. I have no issue with it. Then you think, okay, you traded 21 and 3 second-rounders to only move up 3 spots, which is not nothing. But, again, if he's the guy, go get him, right? So your thoughts on the trade they executed to go draft Walt Clayton Jr.?
Yeah, I mean, if they're right, you're not going to worry about the second-round picks down the road. And they really like this guy. And, I mean, it's funny because in a lot of ways, he's the polar opposite of Ace Bailey in terms of a prospect. Ace Bailey's all about raw talent and potential, and he was this, like 5-star recruit coming out, was pegged as a top lottery pick, when he's 16 years old and all those kind of things. Where old Walt, he's a guy who he went to Siena and he got screamed at by Pitino for a couple of years, came off the bench his freshman year, had to earn a starting spot there. Pitino leaves, transfers to Florida, 4-year guy, a total winner in college, where obviously, Rutgers with Bailey and Harper didn't win last year, won a championship at Florida, comes to Utah, obviously much more mature, just older, more mature, more experienced, an adult, a proven winner who doesn't necessarily have that jump off the page, the measurables, the athleticism, all that kind of thing. But there are, I've seen him compared to Brunson, not identical as players certainly, but in terms of some of the background stuff, very similar.
All right, I'm not going to ask you about Svi Mikhailuk's contract being picked up, so let's move over to what could be next for the Jazz. And the one name that I think everybody's honed in on now is John Collins, with a $26.5 million expiring deal. It was not expiring last year. It is now. And, there's an argument to be made that the season he had last year may have been his best as a pro, or maybe second to the season he had before he got his big contract. And I don't know, Tim, I feel like every time I pull up some sort of rumor site or see a tweet regarding the Jazz potential next move, it lands on John. Any insight on what could be next there?
Well, certainly available in the trade market, but so was Colin Sexton. Obviously, Clarkson was for a while. I don't know that he would be a buyout candidate, but it would make sense if there's nothing that is appealing in the trade market. Look, if he's traded, I don't think you're going to get a significant haul in return. If that was the case, it probably would have already happened, or it would have happened midway through last season. But certainly, I think we all understand that where the Jazz are in their rebuild, where Collins is in his career, that Collins being in Utah this year probably isn't in anybody's best interest.
Well said. All right, we can move off the Jazz. Let's talk about some Western Conference teams that have really, in my estimation, done an excellent job of, closing the gap between themselves and OKC or just taking a step forward. So I'm just going to ask you about a team, and I just want your thoughts. Let's start with the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, obviously starting with a KD trade, that was a big swing, a win now move. That's a move you make that says, hey, we're serious about contending right now. They were able to do it without really shortening their runway at all. Jalen Green got moved in the trade, but he's probably the fourth, fifth, sixth in terms of the young guys that were most important to the future of the franchise. And then I'll be honest with you, the Capella thing kind of caught me off guard. They want to be able to have two bigs available at all times, and obviously Steven Adams is going to miss some time. Finney-Smith, though, here's the thing. The Rockets both went out and drastically upgraded the go-to guy. They got a Hall of Fame go-to guy, and they also leaned into the style of play that they want, that big, just nasty, rough, physical defense, rebound, all that kind of stuff, bringing in Finney-Smith, bringing in Capella. So I think they're the second-best team in the Western Conference.
That's actually what I was going to ask you, because Vegas has them as 2 now, but you answered it, so let's move on. And let me ask you about what the Nuggets are doing. And just coming across the wires, they've added another rotational piece. And I don't know that I'm a huge Tim Hardaway Jr. guy, but you could do worse for like your 9th or 10th man. But what do you make of the way they've gone about their offseason so far?
Yeah, I really liked what they did in terms of like the short term, with Michael Porter Jr. trading him for Cam Johnson. Now, the 2032 pick could end up being a steep price. That's a steep price after Joker's prime. To me, you got a comparable player, if not an upgrade, probably a more versatile, well-rounded player, and you saved a ton of money, which created flexibility. And then, I thought they might just try to duck the tax, but they brought in Jonas Valanciunas today. Hardaway's a minimum guy, but Bruce Brown coming back at the minimum. I mean, those are between Valanciunas, Bruce Brown, and Hardaway. Those are 3 proven bets for the bench. And if one of the young guys like plays Hardaway out of a spot in rotation, great. But if not, volume movement shooters around Joker is not a bad thing to have.
All right, not a Jazz story, but a local story, as Dame Lillard played his college ball up north at Weber State. And, when you see the news, the optics are like, wait, how do you cut Dame Lillard? How do you cut Damian Lillard? And then optically, that's not a great look for who Dame is historically as a Hall of Fame player, but he will get his money and he will decide where either the final or the next stanza of his NBA career will take place. As a result of the deal that Milwaukee made to stretch him, they bring in Miles Turner, which is an interesting dynamic because, as you know, the Bucks and the Pacers aren't necessarily the best of friends. So what do you make of how Milwaukee went about this?
Massive blow to the Indiana Pacers, obviously. I get the fit of Turner with Giannis. Turner is basically a younger, springier version of Brook Lopez. I understand like the logic behind the wave and stretch with Dame. He's going to miss all of next season. You don't know what he's going to be when he comes back. Tell you what, man, paying a guy $113 million to go away, that's tough. And basically the Dame trade ended up being a disaster for Milwaukee. They're still out draft capital in the future. It didn't produce a single playoff series victory. And now he's on their books for the next 5 years at $22.5 million per. I get it. I don't think that bringing in Miles Turner just vaults the Bucks into contender status. And Like, is Kevin Porter Jr. your starting point guard? They still got something to figure out there. Not sure what that answer is going to be, but they're going to need a better answer than that. And as far as Dame goes, like, it's it's a little smudge on his resume, but if he never scores another point, he's a Hall of Famer. And for him, he gets his money, and it's not like he wanted to be in Milwaukee. He made the best of a situation he did not want to be in. So now he gets to choose his next spot, and he gets to choose, probably does he want to sign with somebody this year on a 2-year deal and rehab under their watch, or does he want to kind of play it out, rehab on his own, and be able to evaluate the situation, maybe even late this season or next summer. So my understanding is Dame is not heartbroken about this development.
Only because I've been asked 10 times today, and I believe the answer is emphatically no, because I don't think it makes sense for either side. But every time anybody with a local tie who is good becomes available, a lot of people out here says, okay, the Jazz should go get him. There's not anything that makes sense about Dame Lillard to the Jazz, right?
The Jazz just bought out Jordan Clarkson and traded Colin Sexton for a not very good player to open up minutes for these young guards that they've drafted. That really doesn't. First of all, forget about it making sense for the Jazz. How does that make sense for Damian Lillard?
It doesn't. Yeah.
Like, there's one thing he really wants to do. That's win a championship at this point in his career. And I don't think coming to Utah as they're in a rebuild would be a very good route to that.
I just needed the Tim McMahon approval for my opinion, so I appreciate that. A couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, we were discussing just the potential of Colin Sexton to Dallas because they needed a guard while Kyrie got healthy. Well, they went a different direction. D'Angelo Russell was the decision. And it's not a bad value play, because he's not going to be a long-term answer. But I'm going to find this team really interesting this year. So I will ask you about what this transaction says to you and what you're expecting from the Mavs this year.
Yeah, and the thing with Sexton is, look, the Hornets had a salary of that size they did not mind at all parting with. The Mavericks wanted to keep all their guys who were at that sort of a number. So that's where that got, wonky. And D'Angelo Russell, look, D'Angelo on a max that he's been on is a disaster. I mean, it's a terrible value. Taxpayer mid-level, okay. He's a flawed player. He's not really a point guard. He's more of a lead guard. They're going to give Cooper Flagg every opportunity to prove that he can handle a lot of the point duties as a rookie. And, basically D'Angelo Russell, his job is to come in to get buckets in the starting lineup for the first half of the season and then hopefully transition to a six-man role when Kyrie comes back. It is a little tough to make the mantra defense wins championships kind of your repeat line as a general manager, and then your most significant move of the offseason, aside from drafting a hell of a defender number one overall, is signing D'Angelo Russell. But again, this is a team that they needed shooting, they needed playmaking. They need a guy who can create his own shot. And D'Angelo Russell can do all those things at a price point where you're not going to get it all. So if he was a really good defender, he wouldn't be available at that price point.
I'm going to ask you about LeBron because I feel obligated, but it's just kind of a weird story to understand as far as how this thing is playing out. He picked up his option, 52.6, but he's also monitoring what the Lakers do, contemplating his future, according to several reports. I just feel like LeBron will be playing for the Lakers next year next to Luka Doncic, but they've got work to do via free agency that they have not come close to being able to execute. I don't know how much of this is new ownership, but what's the take on the LeBron Lakers stuff?
Well, and Rich Paul went on the record with a very subject to interpretation type of statement, but essentially indicating hey, LeBron's opting in for the money, and we'll figure out if he really wants to be there. But they understand trading a guy making $52.6 million to his preferred destination is not easy, or in a lot of situations is not even really possible, but in part because if you're going to trade a guy at that salary, A lot of guys are going to have to come back, and then it might not be a situation you want to be a part of anymore. Um, there are people around the league who are like, is LeBron trying to bully his way to a buyout from the Lakers? And if you're sitting in Rob Pelinka and Jeannie Buss's chair, the answer to that is just sorry, no. Like, we're paying you $52.6 million. You'll be playing basketball for the Los Angeles Lakers this year. Really looking forward to it, and we're doing our best to upgrade the roster. I will see you when training camp starts.
Yeah, that's kind of how I read it as well. All right, before I set you loose, it was interesting because Quinn had Nickeil Alexander-Walker here and didn't play him. And it felt like when he had opportunities, like Quinn just preferred Royce. And I wasn't, I wasn't entirely on board with it, but Quinn's the coach and he knows more than I do. Well, he'll have another opportunity to get to know him a little bit, and maybe it'll work out differently because he had a great stretch in Minnesota. Luke Kennard, in addition to Kristaps Porzingis. The East is wide open, and the Atlanta Hawks might have something to say about it.
I'll be honest with you, I'd completely forgotten that Quinn very briefly had Nickeil Alexander-Walker in Utah. That is interesting. I'd totally forgotten about that. Obviously, Royce O'Neal was a proven commodity, was somebody who'd earned Quinn's trust, and the circumstances are much different because Alexander Walker has proven himself as a high-level role player, not just a 3-and-D guy, but a guy who can, make some plays off the dribble, initiate, facilitate some, and clearly was quite valued by the Atlanta Hawks. I mean, he's coming in $62 million over 4 years, and I agree with you. I think the Hawks have had a heck of a summer. In a wide-open Eastern Conference, I think they are the most improved team. I think they've positioned themselves to, potentially have home court advantage in the first round. And, we can talk about the Knicks and the Cavs as the favorites in the East going into next year, but it's wide open. And the Hawks are one of the teams I think have positioned themselves to be in the mix.
Tim, you're the man. Keep up the great work. It's been a fun couple of days. Have a good week, and we'll chat soon.
Appreciate you, brother.
Tim McMahon covers the NBA for ESPN, and he is their Jazz guy when the Jazz are in a different spot than they are right now. How about we just say it like that? Adam Sandler is coming to the Delta Center on October the 26th. Tickets are on sale now. Text CLICK to 33986 for your chance to win. That's CLICK to 33986 for your chance to win. All right, coming up on the other side, Smitty live in studio. His weekly hit. Lot to do. Tuesday show. Keep it here. ESPN 700. We got a little breaking news about a commit for Utah football in 2026. Kelvin Obot, the number 9 overall recruit in the 2026 class. This kid is legit offensive tackle. We'll see what that does to Utah's recruiting rankings. Of course, that's not for 2 years. There's still football left to be played before we get to know these young men. It is day 2 of NBA free agency. Wimbledon's going on. It feels like a great day to have Richard Smitty Smith live in studio. You been catching any of the tennis?
I have. The Wimbledon started Sunday, and today, earlier today, Coco Gauff, number 2 seed, and the women's singles draw lost right after winning the Roland Garros in Paris, and so it's a big loss on the women's side right off the bat in the tournament. But that's a big difference, Spence, between playing on clay and playing on grass. It's a major difference in the way you play the game, and they make that transition all the time in the spring. From the middle of June, through the middle of July, and going on grass over in Europe, and it's a tougher game. It's a different game.
Coco Gauff became the 3rd woman in the Open era to lose in the first round at Wimbledon after winning the championship of the French Open, so a pretty rare thing. Novak Djokovic just won his 99th Wimbledon match, which is 3rd all time, so some fun tennis going on over at Wimbledon. Is Wimbledon your favorite major championship?
Well, no. I mean, I just enjoy the tennis and it all. I've never been to Wimbledon. My wife Linda has been there, and my brother-in-law and my nephew have been there, and I've been to the Australian Open, been to the U.S. Open 100 times over the years, because we go back every year for the U.S. Open, but Indian Wells, of course, the last several years. But I haven't been to Wimbledon. That's on my list, and I can never go, Spence, because Wimbledon is always this time of year. So working for the Jazz, it was always the draft, going right into free agency, going right into summer league. So it was never a time where we were able to go and travel and do that. So I'm looking forward to trying to do that here in the next few years. But it's a fun, traditional place. It's one of the grand spots, obviously, in the sport of tennis.
For sure. All right, let's do the Jazz stuff this segment. We'll save the next segment for some of the big picture NBA free agency storylines. Of course, it's day 2 of NBA free agency. And Smitty, you've been coming on the show now for a while, and it feels like names like Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson have come up in potential trade talks and conversations. Well, we learned what the market is for those 2 players, and the answer is not great. So let's start with the Sexton move. They had to attach a 2nd-round pick to the deal to get him to Charlotte in exchange for Yusuf Nurkic, who is a vet that is a backup big at this point. What'd you make of the deal to send Colin Sexton in a 2nd to Charlotte?
Well, first of all, I'm a Sexton fan, and so I'm the wrong guy to ask probably, in that regard, because even though I get, they just drafted the Clayton kid, and he's probably going to take a bulk of those minutes, and they're still trying to figure out what Keontae George is and what the Williams kid is, and a Collier and all that. So I get that part of it. But for me, Sexton is one of the guys who has proven he can play in this league. He's gotten more efficient every year that he's been in the league. This past year, I thought he was very efficient, played a very tight game during the course of the year on a team that wasn't winning and a team that didn't really care about winning. And he was one of the few guys who would go out and compete every night, in my opinion. And so, I understand they're trying to get off his money, and I understand they're trying to get the young guys, the playing time, and I get that part of it. But when you see him moving a guy who's actually proven that he has some value in the league in terms of how he plays and his production level, that's sometimes a head scratcher to me. But okay, that's the way they're choosing to do their business right now. Were
you surprised that they couldn't get more value for him, or do you feel like they just wanted to find a new home for him and clear up time for the young guards?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to gauge that, Spence. I think he's more valuable than that myself. But okay, they maybe they had their own time frame. They wanted to get out from under it before the free agency stuff started, so they could figure out where they were at money wise and whatnot. I'm not convinced that Nurkic is going to be part of what they're going to try and do next year. I don't know if that was I'm not sure what the play was there, to be honest with you, unless they like Nurkic for some reason that I don't see.
That can't be it.
And or they think he's going to have more value to some playoff type team come February during the trade deadline, where somebody's going to want a big that they can put in a lineup during rotations in the playoffs. Maybe that's what the longer play is here. But of course, he's on an expiring contract next year as well. So, worst case scenario, they have him on the team for this coming season. They get off him next summer. They got that money to use next summer in free agency stuff, and they move on. So I think the whole thing with the Jazz is just a big, evolving, moving puzzle that they're going to constantly keep moving guys in and out of during this summer and into the fall and even during next season. I think these next 12 months are all, to me, going to be part of a big experiment under the Austin Ainge direction to see how they set themselves up for the summer of 26 and then moving forward. That's what it feels like to me.
So they essentially cut Jordan. They essentially cut Jordan Clarkson. Technically, it was a buyout. If the numbers I have in front of me are correct, it saved the Jazz about $1 million in cash. So I have a couple questions here. The reaction to the news that Jordan is no longer a Jazz man has been really interesting to follow. People are genuinely sad that he's leaving. The trade that you guys made for him, in retrospect, was an excellent deal. You moved Dante Exum, a couple second-rounders to Cleveland for Jordan. Comes here, wins Sixth Man of the Year, played really well for Quinn. Last holdover from that group. So just wonder what your thoughts are that they've decided to move on from him in the way that they did. He's going to be a Knick, and maybe you can provide some color and context as far as what he meant to the Jazz organization.
Well, I think I think it's not surprising to me. I think they've been trying to do that for a year now. I think they finally got to it. They found a way with Jordan. They couldn't do anything during the season last year. They couldn't find anybody to bite on his deal that had, obviously last season and this coming season under contract. At an okay number in today's NBA terms at $14 million a year. I'm not surprised at all that they decided to move on from him. It was just a matter of getting him, figuring out a way to do it. They couldn't find a trade partner they liked, apparently, so they worked a deal with him to get a buyout so he could get the freedom to move to a team where he feels he can add something to a contending team and give himself a little bit more spark and a little more life on the court for a team that's trying to win and trying to be competitive night in and night out. And and the Jazz get out from some money, and that's the whole play here. And look, that was the play really when they signed him to this deal that they did a couple years ago, because they had front loaded that deal at 24, I think it was, at 25 the first year, and then 14 and 14. So the whole deal was set up so that they could move him at some point during the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. It just took them a year to figure out how to do it. They didn't get a trade partner, so they did the buyout thing, saved themselves a little money. Clarkson gets to decide where he's going to go instead of just being put in a trade. So it kind of works out for everybody. I'm always surprised players are willing to give up, any money, in some kind of a buyout situation. I've never understood why players would do that, but I guess that's what you do when you just get to some point in your life where, I have enough money. That's okay. I'll just leave some on the table. You can take it, and I'm going to go out the side door. Okay.
Yeah, I guess. And it really just begs the question as far as what's next. And to underscore the points that you're essentially making, it feels like Austin, as the primary decision maker, has just decided they're going to clear the deck. And next year, it's weird, Smitty, and we should acknowledge that Austin is a recent hire. So some of the messaging from the front office last year probably is not the messaging from the front office this year. But one of their cliched lines, and I heard Zanuck say this, I heard Danny say this, I heard Will say this, is they kept saying pups can't raise pups. Okay, so last year was kind of like Patty Mills, Drew Eubanks, will bring in some locker room vets to help these young players learn how to be pros. Feels like there's a paradigm shift. It feels like pups this year will very much be raising pups because it looks like what we're going to see is just all these young kids playing a lot of minutes.
Yeah, well, I imagine they will. And, there's something to be said for veteran leadership, for helping young guys learn how to do it. I guess, look, we just saw Joe Ingles is going to go back to Minnesota.
Another $3.6 million for our guy.
And we know Joe, I'm not sure he has anything left in the gas tank. But obviously Minnesota sees him as being a valuable member of their group. With this group with the Jazz, I don't know, the Patty Mills thing, the Drew Eubanks thing. I never got that anyway, especially when they're everybody knows that they're not trying to win games. So that makes it difficult if you're a veteran to try and get the point across to guys about, this is how we conduct ourselves. This is how we go about our business every day, working hard in practice, staying late, arriving early in the weight room, whatever it is. And guys are asking in the middle of the game, to do what? What are we doing? We're going to lose by 20 anyway. What's the difference? So that's a very tough, complex thing that I think is just very difficult for an organization to manage. And keep everybody going the right direction. You're either trying to put your best foot forward and you're trying to do the best you can every night, or you got a different agenda. And guys learn things differently, and they certainly can get into good habits, and they also can get into bad habits depending on what your organization is asking you to do from one moment to the next. So. We'll see. I mean, the Jazz they're in this great flux area right now, and they've got there's a new sheriff in town, as they say, and we'll see again. But Austin Ainge isn't trying to pull the Donald Trump thing. He's not like a man on an island trying to run everything. He's got valuable guys with him in the room, not the least of which, of course, is his dad, and he's got a very involved owner. And so that plays into it somehow, but they got a lot of guys in there voicing, opinions about what they should do and how they should be handling their guys and all that. But it's no secret, and it shouldn't be that they're going to play their young guys a lot of minutes and have them in some kind of set rotation as the season starts in terms of minutes and responsibilities and seeing. What these guys can figure out going forward.
So it brings us to John Collins. That's the next name to hone in on. And we'll get to some others because I honestly don't know how this is going to play out. $26.5 million expiring this year. This is the first time they've had him with an expiring contract. I don't know how much of that plays into the ability to move on from him. You can make an argument, Smitty, that last year was his best year as a pro. Maybe second to the year he had in Atlanta before he got his big contract. Right. But if you're a GM and you're running a team and Austin calls you and says, "What about John Collins?" What do you say?
Well, first of all, John Collins has a big number for what John Collins does right now in the NBA. Now, he played very well last year, in my opinion, on a team that wasn't trying to play well. So I give him credit for that. He's a big guy. He's a fluid guy who can play inside and outside. It depends on the team. It depends on who else they got on the floor with him playing. I have to admit I liked him better last year than I did the previous couple years. I was never a big John Collins guy. I always thought he played in second gear and never really was busting it out on the floor. But last year I thought he played well. For most of the year on a team where it was difficult to play well and to put your best foot forward. And so, they're going to have to try and find a team that is willing to take on his money. I don't know who wants to do that. The Jazz may have to try and do something, where they're willing to take on some of the money and do some kind of a deal with that with somebody. It's going to be difficult to move him, I think, merely because of the money that he makes. So they're going to have something involving his money and how they handle that if they, in fact, want to move on from him.
I'm going to ask you about the other transactions just because they were made. We might have 10 seconds for each of them. They waived Johnny. They waived Johnny Juzang.
Come on now, see now that shows you're not being serious.
What do you want?
Stuff like that?
What do you want me to do?
You know, like.
I mean, was there? Did you think there was a place for him at the end of the bench? No.
No.
Okay.
I've never been a Johnny Juzang guy.
Okay.
All these G League guys they've been playing the last year or so. Again, we can debate that all we want about why they have a G League team if they're using the Jazz as their G League team. But okay, that's what the route that they're choosing to go, and so far the fans are going along with it because the fans are paying full boat money to come see a G League team play on the floor. Okay, all right, you guys want to do that, go ahead. I don't know how long that will last, but that's what they've been doing. And guys like Juzang and Eubanks and Micah Potter and whatever, they're just they're like seat fillers at the Oscars to me. I mean they're just not. You're not getting anywhere. You're spinning your tires. That's my opinion. Now, that's probably why I'm sitting in a radio station instead of being over in their meetings. So that's the way they're going about their business. Okay.
Well, you just gave me 90 seconds on Johnny Juzang. I didn't think we'd be able to do that.
Hey, well, look, he was very good. He had a very nice career at UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
After transferring from Kentucky and played himself well and got himself some NBA money. Okay, I don't know if he'll get an NBA job. He's really a EuroLeague type player to me, and where you can have a nice career. As we've seen a lot of our local guys, J.C. Carroll being one of them, having a terrific career at Real Madrid for a decade. Johnny Juzang should be over there, with one of those teams. That's my opinion, but, I'm not his agent, and I'm certainly not in an NBA team that might try and give him another chance.
In equally compelling news, they've guaranteed the deal as Fee Mikhailuk this year.
Yeah, and I don't know what to say about that either.
All right, fair enough.
That's another placeholder. I'm not sure what that's about. He's probably a good guy. I watched him play when he was 15, 16 over in Europe. He hasn't gotten any better. He's just a guy out there. Every now and then he makes a couple of shots in the game. Okay. And again, but he's a guy who could be having a much bigger career and a more substantial one if he chose to play over in Europe where he's from, and he may end up doing that at some point. But the Jazz have decided at least to guarantee his contract. Now that may be something where they just want to keep his contract, in their back pocket in case they have to use it as a filler in some kind of other move where they have to either take back money or give money or something like that. So it could also be a play like that down the road as well.
All right, so it brings us into this space where, all we can do is read the writing on the wall here and try to read the tea leaves where Clarkson is gone, Sexton is gone. Every time I open up anything about what could be next and the Jazz are mentioned, everyone says they're talking to teams about John Collins. Do you think they're talking to teams about Markkanen? Do you think they're having conversations about Lowry?
I don't know if they're having any active conversations. I haven't heard anything from any of my sources around the NBA about that kind of stuff going on. I think they would certainly entertain any conversation about any guy based on the current status of the team, and that is something that they're still at the starting line, and they're still waiting, for the gun to go off to start the race, and they're still trying to formulate what their team looks like in that regard. So, I don't think Markkanen is untouchable. I don't think Kessler's untouchable. Any of their guys certainly would be in a conversation based on what other teams are looking at or what they would have to offer, and how the Jazz headed up now by the main decision maker being Austin Ainge, how they view what they're trying to do in terms of the overall makeup of their group.
Hello. So I have the Jazz payroll in front of me.
Okay.
I'm going to ask a question before I ask what I want to ask to make sure that my understanding is correct. Is it possible that they have a team option on Taylor Hendricks after this year?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Yeah. Well, the way that the NBA contracts work, the rookie contracts are 4-year deals. The first 2 years are guaranteed. The third year is a team option, and the fourth year is a team option. So the team decides in the third and fourth year of a rookie deal whether they want to keep that rookie for another year or not. So that's how they work.
Is it possible they have a team option on Cody next year?
Yes. Yeah. Again, because those contracts are for 4 years. The first 2 are guaranteed. The third is not guaranteed. The fourth is not guaranteed. So the team has the option to pick up, if they want to keep the player on, they can pick up that option early in the fall for the year ahead. So they can do that if they choose to do that. This is the Jimmer Fredette deal, Spence, where Fredette was taken by Sacramento in the first round. In fact, 10, just like Cody Williams was. And Sacramento decided after the second year they didn't think Jimmer was good enough. They didn't want to pick up the team option, so they just let him go. And the summer after his second year in the league, he became an unrestricted free agent.
So in a way, Smitty, because they also have team options on Keontae, Bryce Sensabaugh, and Isaiah Collier.
That's correct.
So 5 team options on these young players.
That's all just because they're all under rookie scale contracts for the first 4 years they're in the NBA.
So this is kind of a bigger year for these 5 young players than maybe we fully understand, because the Jazz can make a decision on them as early as next season.
Yeah, well, they could have, like, for example, they picked up the option earlier on Keontae George. Okay, so you're allowed to do that, but just say in a hypothetical situation, they Isaiah Collier just finished his first year. So he's got this next year coming up is guaranteed. The Jazz can pick up the third-year option. They have certain dates that they can do that and get that under their belt. Sometimes you do that just to let the player know, hey, we're with you, we're going to work with you, or whatever. Sometimes if, in the Jimmer Fredette case, just say hypothetically Collier comes in, he's out of shape, he's gained weight, he's whatever. They don't like the way he shows up in training camp in the fall. They decide to hold off on picking up his third-year option. They go into the middle of the season. He's not getting better. He's giving him some kind of attitude, whatever. They can decide, hey, I'm not sure we got a guy we want to hang around with or keep. And so they can just wait it out. And then the end of next year, they could say, hey, we're not going to pick up the third-year team option, and we're just going to let him go. And then they get out of the obligation altogether, and now they let the kid move on, and then the team can move on. So that's why it's set up where those third and fourth years on the rookie scale contracts, the team controls whether they still want you as, quote, part of their team or part of their development program, and they want to keep you around doing that. And then at the end of the fourth year, you become a restricted free agent. Now the team may give you an offer. You may accept it and extend that rookie deal, and you can do that into the fifth, sixth, seventh year. Or the team can say, like the Jazz did with Gordon Hayward, we're going to offer you just this amount. Gordon Hayward thought he should get more. The Jazz said, go out and get an offer from somebody and bring it back if you can. Gordon Hayward went out. Got an offer from the Charlotte Hornets for $15 million a year. Comes back, says, I got an offer from Charlotte for $15 million. You offered me 10, and the Jazz had 72 hours to match it. And of course, they didn't want to lose him. So in that regard, the Jazz say, we're going to match that because you're a restricted free agent, and they get to keep him. And they said, in this negotiation, in this moment in time, Gordon, you won the debate because we tried to pay you 10, and you went out and forced us to pay you 15 by getting an offer from someone else. That's how it works. That's why we say in the current setup of the collective bargaining agreement, the first half of a player's career, a minimum 7 years, if the team wants you, they have control of you no matter what you want to do as a player. The second half of your career, if you have a, say, 15-year career like Gordon Hayward did, he's the perfect example of how it works, where the team controls the player's career, the first half of it, and then the player controls what he wants to do in the second half of the career.
Do you think that made Gordon mad?
I don't know if it made him mad. I would say this: Gordon and his dad are very smart guys.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon is one of the smarter players we've had through the Jazz over the years, just in terms of practicality. And he was smart enough, and his agent Mark Bartelstein, who's a very well respected and very good guy and an honest guy, he said, hey, we're gonna go out and try and get an offer to get Gordon more money. That's his job.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Gordon's sitting there going, yeah, okay, yeah, I'd like to get more money if I can. And they went out and they got Charlotte. Now, Charlotte had to make that commitment. So there was a period of 72 hours where Charlotte, if the Jazz say, yeah, that's too rich for our blood, we're out. Now Charlotte's got him.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlotte had to come to the table with that offer and make sure we want the guy in case, Utah turns it down. We got him at that number. And, of course, the Jazz ended up accepting that number, and he stayed with the Jazz for another 3 years. But that's how the CBA works, and that's how all these players they're under contract to the team for those first 4 years with those third and fourth year team options. That's the way it's been for many, many years now. So the team controls, and they're looking at you in practice, and they're looking to see, yeah, Spence Checketts, do we want to keep him around for a third year? Do we want him a fourth year? And the team controls that, and then after that, then you get into the restricted free agent stuff.
All right, before we catch a break, we'll wrap up the Jazz portion of our Hit with Smitty today with just a follow-up based off of all of these players: Isaiah Collier, Bryce Sensabaugh, Keontae George, Cody Williams, Taylor Hendricks are technically entering what could be the final year of their deal with the Jazz.
Sure.
Could be, technically.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you think any of them are in danger of not being brought back?
That's a good question. I think those are probably guys that, again, what's going to be interesting play on it, Spence, now is that, even though there's the obvious, Ainge family connection on that, it was Danny Ainge who selected these guys, parenthetically, in the draft. He's the final decision maker during those drafts. Now, Austin Ainge is the one who's in charge. Maybe Austin Ainge says, hey, Dad, I love you, but the guy you chose last year, he stinks, and I don't like him.
Yeah.
And so they have a disagreement about that. And so, there's always a scenario where they could sit there in a room and go, I just don't think the guy's good enough, and I think we made a mistake. And sometimes when you like the Sacramento Kings and the Jimmy Fredette example, sometimes you have to just step up to the table and admit to yourself and to everybody around, we made a mistake, we made the wrong call, okay, we cut our losses and we move on.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes teams don't like to do that because teams don't want to admit they made a mistake.
Right.
And they don't want to admit that, I had an error in judgment in that regard. And so a lot of times it's very rare that you see a team not pick up the third-year option or the fourth-year option on a player that they drafted because the teams are trying to make sure that they squeeze all the water out of that stone and they make sure guy a full run to show us whether he can contribute and continue playing in the NBA. And, sometimes teams will hold on to guys longer than they should just because they're trying to make sure they give the player every opportunity to improve and to get better.
All right, we'll catch a break. Coming up next, we'll move off the Jazz and just talk more big picture stuff. And, of course, if anything comes down when we're on air, we'll bring it to you. Damian Lillard has been stretched and waived, and the Milwaukee Bucks have acquired Miles Turner. Some other interesting storylines, including Quinn Snyder being reunited with a player he had in Utah who he just didn't play. Atlanta making some moves, Denver making some moves, Houston making some moves. We'll do some big picture NBA with Smitty coming up on the other side of a Tuesday edition of The Drive right here on ESPN 700. We got some breaking news. But don't get too excited. Duncan Robinson has agreed to a 3-year, $48 million deal with the Detroit Pistons.
Okay.
What do you think, Smitty?
Yeah, well, I can see Dennis Lindsey's fingers all over that. Duncan Robinson, a good player with length, and he's a very good open shooter. And the Pistons have money, so another guy that they're adding to their young group that can provide some spacing for Cade Cunningham off the pick and roll to get in the lane, and Robinson can be one of those guys spotting up on the wing or down in the corner, having that three-ball threat. So, a good spot for them, a good way for them to spend some of the money that they have under the cap.
All right, so let's move over to what Milwaukee decided to do today with Damian Lillard, who played his college ball for Randy Ray just up the way. It's what's called a stretch provision, and they waived him. And so from what I'm reading, he'll be on the books for the next 5 years at about $23 million. Optically, when you see that Damian Lillard has been waived by an NBA team, you're like, wait, what? That is a wild, wild decision. Now, of course, he will miss all of next year recovering from an injury. This way, he does get all of his money over the course of a certain amount of time, and he can pick where he wants to go next, whether it's his final act or the next act. But take us through the mentality of a front office. They also utilize the flexibility that they were able to get with this deal to acquire Miles Turner from Indiana. And the Bucks and the Pacers, not a lot of love lost there. So kind of an interesting day for them.
Yeah, well, what the Bucks do is they replace Brook Lopez with Miles Turner. So a little bit younger guy, a little bit springier guy, a little bit livelier body in the middle, a guy who can shoot fairly decently from the outside, about the same as Brook Lopez, but he's a little more active, and that allows them to plug in a guy basically who's going to do the same stuff, within reason that Brook Lopez did for Giannis to support Giannis, in that core in Milwaukee. For Damian Lillard, this is a provision that's provided in the collective bargaining agreement where teams make a mistake, or if it's a mistake or something like this, where they have a guy who's going to be injured and is getting paid a lot of money, and they just want to get out of it somehow. Teams can now have what they call the stretch provision, where they can waive a guy, and then they take his total salary owed, and they can stretch it over any period of time from 1 to 5 years. So obviously teams are going to usually stretch it out to 5, and that means they just chop it up in 5 equal segments, and that's what goes on their books in terms of salary cap purposes for luxury taxes and penalties and all that kind of stuff. So they're going to be paying Damian Lillard around $23 million or whatever it is a year for the next 5 years to sit at his beach house in Portland or do whatever he's going to do. He's going to rehab. He's going to take this next year off. He's one of the hardest working guys in the NBA, and I know that personally. I've seen him do it for years, and we knew that coming into the draft when he got drafted. He's one of the guys you want with around your group because he is a true professional in every regard. So in that way, he's going to work this next year. He's going to work to get himself back as much as he can. And then he's going to try and find a team, whether it's the end of next year, depending on how quickly his rehab goes, if he can get into the playoffs with a team that can use his services in a playoff run type situation. If it's not, then it would be next summer when he'd be full. You would think he would be fully healthy, and then be able to look around and try and find a team that he thinks he can help, that he thinks he can add to their championship hopes. So he would be looking around at that point in time, I think, for a select handful of teams that give him the best chance of maybe making a long run, potentially to the NBA Finals and trying to win a championship near the end of his career. So that's what I kind of would think would be kind of the game plan that he would try and mark out for himself.
All right, let's move over to the West for some teams that I think have made some interesting strides in the right direction. As we've already discussed the Utah Jazz and kind of what they're trying to do throughout the course of this offseason, I think we need to start with Houston, who, of course, acquires Kevin Durant. They extended Jabari. They gave him a 5-year deal. Van Vliet is locked in. And then I'm not sure what's happening in Los Angeles, but Dorian Finney-Smith is a good player. 4 years, $53 million. Clint Capella, they already have Steven Adams on the roster. I mean, the Vegas odds, and I know you love this, second best team in the West as of now. And there's plenty of time between now and the fall. But what do you make of Houston kind of going all in to expedite their process?
Well, what they're smart in is that they've got a guy who they know can produce and be a lead guy in tough playoff situations. So that's Kevin Durant. So now they got these young guys. Look, Steven Adams is a vet. Clint Capella is a vet. Dorian Finney-Smith has been around. He's a vet. So you've got these guys who have playoff experience, to match up with their younger group of guys led by Şengün, who's 22 years old, Jabari Smith, who's 22 years old, Ahmed Thompson is 22. Then you put that, you mix them in with Cam Whitmore, and then, of course, they re-signed Fred Van Vliet as well. And so you've got a good mix of veterans and young guys, and they're trying to get something done the next couple of years while they've got Kevin Durant in the fold and still playing at the highest of levels. So that's what they've figured out, and they figured out the money that they can get this done with. And so they've gone all in on trying to see if they can challenge the OKCs and the Denvers and the Golden States of the Western Conference the next couple of years.
I wonder real quick, going back to this Turner deal, if you're a Pacers fan, you were in Game 7 of the Finals 10 days ago. Like, Halliburton's also going to miss time. What do you think is going on with the Indiana front office? Are they kind of viewing next year the way Boston is without Tatum? It caught me off guard because I'm looking at what the Pacers just did. I'm looking at the East wide open. No, Halliburton changes their equation. Yeah. 10 days ago, they were in Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and Miles Turner is a buck.
And you can look at it a lot of different ways, Spence. One is to say, hey, yeah, we got to Game 7. We had 48 minutes to possibly win the NBA championship. Didn't go our way. But we also have to be objective and look at how we got to Game 7, and that was with a lot of good play during the playoffs, but also a lot of good fortune during the playoffs in different series where the ball literally bounced their way several times. They got them, a win in a playoff series that propelled them to go on to the next round of the playoffs. So they may be looking at it and saying, yeah, we had a good run. We had a lot of things go our way. We had the tough injury in the last game. Yeah, it didn't quite work out that way, but we can't fool ourselves into thinking we're really that good in that regard. And so we have to step back and make sure we're assessing our team fairly, and that also, unfortunately, involves not having a Tyrese Halliburton next season on our playing roster. And so that's one thing we have to look at and assess in a way that makes sense for us in the short term, but also going forward in the long term, what it means to us.
Oftentimes there's this debate that rages about, who's the best local college player that has made his way towards the NBA and professional basketball. And I don't know who the best is, but I know who the richest is Jakob Poeltl has signed the richest contract in the history of any player that has played his college ball here. $104 million extension for Jakob Poeltl. I wonder, back when he was here, how you scouted him, what sort of player you thought he would be, and your thoughts that he continues to play at a high level, and Toronto obviously very values him.
Yeah, he's, I thought he'd be a solid pro, and I think that's what he is. I don't think he's an all-star level player, but I think he's a good starting center in the NBA. He works hard. He's a good teammate. He's a good locker room guy. While this looks like a lot of money, basically $26 million a year for the next 4 years, that's unfortunately that's the going rate, for regular guys. Now, if you look across the landscape of the NBA and with this new TV contract and the new salary cap that's in play now, that's just going to keep creeping up. And so guys like Jakob Poeltl can be in the right place at the right time, and they can cash in on a deal like that. That doesn't people tend to interpret someone getting money with them going to come out the next year and give us an increased value of production. That's usually not the case. What you're doing is you're just paying the guy because that's the going rate to keep him on your team for what you hope is going to be some kind of improved play by the group as a whole. Jakob Poeltl is a very nice player. Toronto obviously likes him. They drafted him, they traded him, they got him back. Now they're committing to him, with this new 4-year deal, and that's part of what they're trying to establish as a core group there in Toronto. Obviously now without Masai Ujiri leading them in that regard, and with Bobby Webster, the longtime general manager at the moment, making those decisions.
All right, let's do a quick. I do want to talk about what the Atlanta Hawks have elected to do, and our old buddy Quinn Snyder is coaching that team. And I told you this before, San Antonio, Oklahoma City, there are certain decision makers in the league where they do something, and I'm just like, okay, it makes sense because that's who they are, and that's the reputation they've earned. 4 years, $41 million for Luke Cornett feels like a lot of money, though, for the San Antonio Spurs, but they get a legitimate backup to Wembanyama. Insurance if Wembanyama has more health issues, and San Antonio adds Dylan Harper via the draft, and they obviously have the back-to-back Rookie of the Year winners with Wembanyama and Stephon Castle. But what do you make of San Antonio paying Luke Cornett $41 million over 4 years?
I think that's a lot of money for what Luke Cornett does. He's an active player. He's long. He's can move somewhat, not great. But he plays hard when he's out there. He can hit an occasional shot, but he's more of a serviceable big man. $10 million seems like it's a lot of money for someone like him. You can get guys like him, in my opinion, at a lesser number, but they have some money to spend. They like him. It's not going to be a big number. 2 years from now, when he's in the third year of the deal, he's still making $10 million, so it may look even better then. But he's a player that they wanted to go out and add to their core group. It's it feels like a lot of money for someone like him and what he does to me, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of money to secure a guy that you think adds to your group culturally. He's a good guy in the locker room. He's a good guy, on the practice floor. And he's someone who's going to add to how you want to try and do things in San Antonio.
Another local story, but not involving the Utah Jazz. Anybody who knows anything knows that the Bountiful Braves are known for developing good-looking guys that can really shoot it.
There you go.
And so Sammy Merrill, another contract, 4 years, $38 million for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
So they call that, I think in circles, they call that the Bountiful Spence Checketts number.
Well said.
So that's right around that area. But, happy for Sam. Look, he's bounced around on a number of teams. He was the last guy taken in his draft year. He's had to go through the G League route a few times. He's been out of jobs a few times. He's been one of those guys who has 1 foot in, 1 foot out. He's stuck with it. Again, another guy that to me might have been, I can't say better served, because obviously he just got this deal now with a very competitive NBA team that likes him and that uses him in their rotation. So he's going to be making $9 million a year the next 4 years. He could have a bigger role on a EuroLeague team and be very competitive playing in Europe, but he'd probably only be making $2 or $3 million.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for him, he stuck with it. He believed in himself. He worked at it. He's a great, he's an A-plus guy, as we all know. And, he's a little bit of a one-trick pony. at the NBA level, but he's managed to figure out how to do that at a level that allows him to contribute to a very good team and to fit in with the group of guys that they have. And Spence, all the time we talk about the fact you're not just this isn't a one-on-one tournament in the NBA. You got to be part of a group, of a team that's trying to be on the same page to try and affect winning and trying to move your team forward. And Cleveland obviously values him as one part of their equation for playing winning basketball in the role that he provides them. And so it's a great moment for Sam. I couldn't be happier for him and his family because he's really earned it and has really put himself in this position.
Denver, we should talk about Denver because I feel like, well, first of all, they have Jokic, so they're just going to be relevant because they have who I think is the best player in the world right now. But they have been criticized over the past couple of years for letting contributors walk instead of going into luxury tax or second apron, whatever it is. And they made three pretty interesting moves. First, they trade Michael Porter Jr. in an unprotected first-round pick in 2032. Now, it's 2025, so nobody knows. In 2032, Jokic will be 37, so we'll see what Brooklyn's able to grab there. They bring in Cam Johnson, who was a Sun for a minute, and I think there's a lot to like about Cam Johnson. And then they bring back Bruce Brown, who was a key member of their championship team a few years ago. And look, I'm not a huge Tim Hardaway Jr. guy, but if he's your 9th or 10th guy, I think you're doing all right. What do you make of the three moves Denver's made?
Yeah, I think what they've done, they brought back a guy who they know and they can fit in seamlessly with how they play, and that's Bruce Brown. They made the switch with Michael Porter and brought in Cam Johnson. Not quite as big as Porter, but maybe does the same kind of stuff, within reason for how their group operates. Of course, then by adding those guys in the mix, to go with the guys they already have in Gordon and Jokic and Murray, those guys can fit in with what they do and how they're trying to do it. And of course, they've got the emerging player Christian Brown, who I think gives them something. And then also they brought in both Jonas Valanciunas, and they got him in a trade now to bring him in as a backup. He's a very good. Be a very good backup for Jokic and may be able to give him some extra minutes from game to game, which would be interesting to them. And then and then I believe aren't they bringing it back Russell Westbrook?
That's not official yet, but what is official is they've also traded Dario Saric for Jonas Valanciunas.
Yeah, they've traded Saric for Valanciunas, and they're getting him to be Jokic's backup, which is smart because he can take extra minutes. So he can play maybe more backup minutes than the Denver backups have been doing for Jokic, so can give him more time off the court during games, which will extend him during the course of the season. So when he gets to April and May and hopefully June for them, he's played fewer minutes that year, and maybe he'll have more gas in the tank come playoff time.
Final one, Smitty. I think this is fascinating because the Atlanta Hawks have a coach named Quinn Snyder, and once upon a time, Quinn Snyder had a player named Nickeil Alexander-Walker who could not get off the bench. Quinn seemed to prefer Royce O'Neal and some other players. Nickeil Alexander-Walker goes to Minnesota, has a really good run. Playoffs, game 2, 3, and 4, he had like 52 points on 19 of 32 shooting. Once Minnesota brought back Naz Reid and Julius Randle, it looked like Nickeil was out of their price range, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker lands in Atlanta to play for Quinn again. They make the deal last week for Kristaps Porzingis. Terrence Mann goes to Brooklyn. George Niang, a former buddy around here, goes to Boston. And then they also bring in Luke Kennard from the Memphis Grizzlies. So, again, as we've talked about, the East certainly feels like it is pretty wide open. I don't know if you think Atlanta's put themselves in the mix, but some interesting movement from the Atlanta Hawks.
No, they've added some players that will help them. Some guys who will be very good players, maybe starting, but certainly rotational type guys. And Nickeil, he'll come in. He'll give them good rotation minutes. He's a good role player who can play multiple positions. Of course, Luke Kennard's one of the better shooters in the league, and he has had that experience to be able to extend defenses. They have the new draft pick that they got last week, Asa Newell out of Georgia, who I think has a chance to be a pretty good player. If Porzingis is healthy, he's got 1 year left, so he's kind of like on a trial basis with them to see what he can do during the course of the year and if he can stay healthy. And, of course, they had the number 1 pick 2 years ago with Zachary Rissache, who's still a guy who's learning, who's developing. So they have a nice mix of guys there all around Trae Young, who controls all the action from the point guard position. So, a nice mix of guys there. Of course, again, Atlanta dealing with a front office change of their own, so they have some different decision makers there now, and we'll see how that plays out for Quinn Snyder and his group.
I'm going to ask you one more question only because I just received my 5th text message of the day about this, and I know the answer to it, so don't get mad at me. Don't put me in my corner. There's nothing that makes sense about the Jazz and Dame Lillard, right? There's nothing that makes sense about Dame Lillard signing with Utah Jazz for either the Jazz or Dame.
That would be correct, in my opinion. I mean, Damian Lillard he's going to be taken next year to rehab, get his leg right, and get all that stuff straightened out. And he'll do that because he's that kind of a worker. And then, my opinion, I would assume that he would then be in a position to be able to look around the league and target 3, 4, 5 teams that he thinks he could add to, either as the starter, depending on what a particular team situation is, or as a valuable rotation backup guy to try and get somebody over the hump in a playoff situation. Is that it might be too late for somebody like the Lakers, but just as a hypothetical example, maybe a year from now, if he rehabs well enough and he's ready to go next March or April, maybe he looks at the Lakers and says, hey, I can go with LeBron James and Luka Doncic and those guys, and I can help them in the spring, make something happen. Or maybe, he goes somewhere else for one of these other teams and tries to give them some help. Again, he's either as their starter or off the bench to try and help them make an extended playoff run toward a potential championship.
Well, Smitty, I think today was the day you finally became a pro at radio. You gave me 5 minutes on Johnny Juzang being waived and Svi Mikhailuk's contract picking up. That's called filibustering, and if you can't do that, you can't do this job. So bravo, sir.
See, that you can throw any name you want, Spence, at me. If I don't know it, I certainly will have 2 minutes that I just make up on the fly.
That's part of the job, man. Hey, great to see you. We'll get you back soon, okay?
Thanks, Spence.
The great Richard Smith, day 2 of NBA free agency. Sarah Todd will join us. Get back to some college football storylines in the 5 o'clock hour of The Drive. The latest on Jake Retzlaff and BYU. University of Utah football picked up a really nice commit for 26. So we'll get to that in the 5 o'clock hour of The Drive before we say goodnight at 6. About 90 minutes left in the show on a Tuesday drive right here on ESPN 700. Get over to the 5 o'clock hour of the program. Coming up in just a little bit, bring in Kyle Bonagura from ESPN, the latest on the Jake Retzlaff situation at BYU. University of Utah locks in a nice commit today for the 2026 class. We'll be in Dallas, or I guess Frisco, technically next week for Big 12 Media Days. But let's do a little more jazz. It's been a while, but our good friend from the Deseret News, Sarah Todd, stops by on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah, happy Tuesday. How are you?
Happy Tuesday, Spence. Tuesday, what a beautiful day.
It is. It is a beautiful day, and we've got a lot to do with you because it's been a minute since we've been able to connect. So we'll start with a little jazz draft stuff. And I just wonder what your understanding is of this narrative surrounding Ace Bailey, who the Jazz landed on a number 5, and the whole, hey, he doesn't want to be here. His camp doesn't want him to be in Salt Lake City. And then there's rumors that he won't report. There all of the things, and I can't corroborate any of them, but your thoughts on the Jazz drafting Ace and your understanding of the narrative surrounding that selection.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I expected to happen is what happened, right? Like once Ace Bailey was here, once you get him in the building, once the zeros behind the dollar sign are made clear on the rookie contract, then everything else kind of falls into place. And that's how I kind of expected this to play out. I didn't expect him to not report. It's my understanding that the top 5 team that he was rumored to have, his team to have not said that he would report to was not the Utah Jazz. But, that's neither here nor there at this point, right? But I think that the biggest thing that I can say is that the narrative that kind of started to formulate about maybe Ace being entitled and not really, knowing how this process works and being like an arrogant kid, that it was expecting too much. That's the part that I didn't appreciate because, we're talking about an 18-year-old kid. We're talking about a literal teenager who had people in his corner handling his business. And they were the ones that were representing him and speaking on behalf for him during the pre-draft process. And I think that was all done in a very misguided fashion. And now we move on from it.
As far as what you think he can be as a player for the Jazz as he grows, I mean, it's going to be tough because there are very few 18-year-olds that aren't named LeBron James that step in and look like they're ready. But and we'll get to some of the decisions that have already been made. It does indicate that there should be plenty of minutes for him. I think a lot of fans are excited about that. So I'll ask a two-parter. What do you think it looks like immediately, and what should Jazz fans hope it looks like eventually?
Immediately, probably not going to look great, right? You said it. There's not a lot of guys that come into this league and look perfect and ready and, polished right away. But I think that prior to draft night on the Utah Jazz roster, there was probably not a single player on the roster that Jazz fans could have gone out and got his jersey and been like, yes, this is going to be a guy that's going to be a part of the future, no questions asked, right? Even if we're talking about guys like Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler, those are not guarantees. Like the Jazz are going to hear offers that come in for them. And if one makes sense, they'll make it. And so like the young guys on this roster currently, like, yeah, there's been some flashes of potential, but there's nothing that we've seen at this point that says like, absolutely no questions asked, Isaiah Collier is a building block for the future, right? Like there's just not a player on the team. And so then draft night comes and Ace Bailey is someone that has potential to be a clear building block. So like, what could we see in the future? This kid could be really good. He has all-star potential, and we don't know if he's going to reach that ceiling. We don't know what's going to happen, and that's part of like the risk of all of this and building teams. But if you're looking towards like what the Jazz are trying to do, he could be one of the certain building blocks.
I feel the same way, and I also feel like this fan base has been a little. And look, we should be very clear, Sarah, as you and I visit throughout the course of the offseason and into next season. This appears that it will be another very long year from a standpoint of wins and losses. But at least there's like a plan starting to formulate a little bit. And I do feel like there's genuine excitement in the community for Jazz fans about what Ace could eventually be. Are you getting kind of the same vibe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, me and you both said when, Austin Ainge was hired and the question was asked by Sean O'Connell, like, what's your philosophy on manipulating player minutes and availability in order to tank? And he said, you won't see that this year. The subtweet on that was because we won't have the players on the roster that we need to manipulate their minutes, right? And that's what we're seeing. You don't need to sit Jordan Clarkson out anymore because they bought out his contract. You don't need to worry about sitting a healthy Colin Sexton because they've traded him. Now, you bring in Yusuf Nurkic, and a lot of fans see that, and they think, why would you give up like a 26-year-old guy who's really efficient shooter for someone who's basically like a washed backup center? Well, because the Jazz don't want to win. That's why. And so they got what they wanted out of that deal. They got the exact amount of expiring money that Colin Sexton would have been on, and they got someone that they don't have to worry about sitting on the bench when he's healthy. And so I think that yes, Jazz fans are absolutely in for another long season. It's not going to be very good, but at least you are going to see exactly what we have out of all of the young guys. There will be no lack of opportunity for them to get on the floor, and they're going to be competing against each other and competing for their next contracts.
So that brings us to, and it's Walt. It's not Walter. It's Walt Clayton Jr. That's what he wants to be called. And if that's what he wants, we'll give it to him. So I'll call him Walt. And I'm a little conflicted about this. I think where I've landed, and I thought Brad Stevens' comment was interesting when he was asked about Austin trading up for Walt Clayton Jr., and he said, I could have told you 2 years ago Austin was going to go trade up for him. So this is a player Austin has liked for a long time. And so where I've landed on it is, and look, only time will tell. We'll see how it manifests. But if that's your guy, go get him, okay? If that's the guy you've identified, you've done your calculation, go get him. But you trade 21 for 18, and then you also trade 3 second-round picks, which is also not nothing to only move up 3 spots. Like I said, my net is if Walt's the guy, go get him. But what's your take on the transaction?
Yeah, I think I kind of fall in the same place as you. Like, if that's the guy that you wanted, if that's the guy that you singled out and you really wanted to get him, and you heard that Miami was gonna pick him before you wanted to, and all you had to do was give up some seconds to move up, sure, go get the guy that you really, really want. Of course, how that plays out in the future is going to determine whether or not it was a good move to make. And also with you, like 3 seconds isn't nothing, but if it's 3 second-round picks for a guy that you really believe in that then turns into somebody that could be like a full rotation player for a good number of years, then like it's hard to find those players in the second round, right? Like those are such like luck of the draw picks in the second round that you don't always know whether it's going to be, Nikola Jokic or some guy that you never heard of even after draft night because he never even played a day in the NBA, right? And so it's kind of a this or that, and time will tell. But I'm fine with it, Like I like that the Jazz took Walter Clayton Jr. and even in the second round when they picked John Tonji, like a couple of guys that just aren't 18, right? You've got a bunch of guys who came in off one and done years in college. And I just like that they have some guys that are going to come in and like actually can play some basketball and maybe don't need like the maturation time that the others need. That doesn't mean that they're going to be great, but I just think that it's good that it's on the roster, that not everybody is an actual teenager.
Well said. Let's go back to the Sexton deal. You outlined it well, and we could just bottom line it with your answer, but I'll follow up asking if you are surprised that there wasn't better value out there for Colin, who's coming off a good year, and he's one of the players that has shown he's a pro, shot over 40% from three, was about 19 points a night. And to your earlier point, that may have been the only motivation they wanted, a matching salary and a player that you don't need to play because Nurkic is no longer anything other than a vet that can give you 10 or 12 minutes a night. But were you surprised there wasn't more value in return with that transaction for the Jazz?
A little bit, right? I think that especially if you're thinking about John Collins, the way that he has kind of improved his offensive game since coming to Utah, and then Colin Sexton, he showed that he can be a little bit more of a distributor, right? Like it looked like these were positive value guys, but I think there's a couple of things that came to mind kind of right after the initial like sticker shock. And that's obviously not to say John Collins is gone, but I assume that he will be at some point. Number one, these are guys that looked really good on the Jazz. And that is a bar that is very low in the NBA as of today. I mean, when you're playing on the absolute worst defensive team in the league and you're playing on a team that has the least amount of wins and the minutes that you play look good, that's relative. And number two, the value of these players might not necessarily been the value of them in particular, but maybe just the value of the Jazz's negotiating power in these situations. The rest of the NBA knows exactly what the Jazz are doing. They know that they need to get off these veteran expiring deals. They know that they want a runway for the young players to play, and so the Jazz don't really have leverage here. It's like, well, you want us to take on a contract that you don't want, and you want a player that's also on an expiring to come back? Like, what's in it for us? Especially for, like, let's look at Charlotte. Like, it's not like they need a bunch of guards. And so it doesn't really, really shock me once I start to think about it that the rest of the league is like, hey, Utah, what can you even show us that proves that these are good players, that they played kind of good on the worst team in the league? That doesn't really say much.
Yep. No, well said. All right. Now this moves us over to Jordan Clarkson. A couple of different layers to this question. I have been a little bit surprised at how sad a lot of people are to see JC go. Last couple of years, the on-court stuff just wasn't great. The advanced numbers weren't great. The usage, the true shooting percentage, none of us are as young as we used to be. And, he's not the guy that won Sixth Man of the Year. In retrospect, the trade that Zanuck and that group made for him was really good, sending Dante and a couple of second-rounders to Cleveland for him. But I think you'll have better perspective on this than I do as somebody who's on the beat. And I always say this, you should listen to the beat writers. They know more than any of us. It does feel like throughout this 4-year pivot, clunky rebuild that at best has been mediocre and at worst has been embarrassing, he's kind of been a North Star, like a bright spot for the organization, bright spot for the locker room. So as Clarkson walks out the door and reportedly is going to sign with the Knicks, can you put some perspective on why a lot of people feel like this is kind of a sad day?
Yeah, I think even the on-court stuff, has context, right? Like, Jordan getting the ball from a bunch of rookies or second-year guys with 5 seconds on a shot clock is not really the best way to operate. And, or another situation, if you imagine, Jordan's in an ISO situation on the right wing and he looks over and the guy that's open from three is Isaiah Collier, who can't shoot threes. And I probably wouldn't want to pass the ball either. And so I think that it was just a really weird situation. And so that led to some bad numbers. Part of it is obviously what you said, right? Father Time is undefeated. He's not the man that he used to be. All of that's true too. But I think that he was also, like, the last 3.5 years really took a toll on him. I mean, even that last year with the Donovan and Rudy team, that took a toll on those players. And he was the last player on this team that had ties to that team. And so I don't think that he ever really got to recover and move on from that because he was still here. And so, yeah, it didn't look great, and I'm honestly really happy that he gets a chance to go play for a team that's actually going to play for some meaningful basketball. Like, the game's mattering makes me happy for Jordan. And he was kind of a bright spot, and I think that's probably one of the reasons that the Jazz held on to him a little bit is because he was a familiar face. He was a sellable name. He's somebody that could get butts in seats. He was also, he has an incredible wealth of knowledge about the NBA. Like, he might not have ever been the guy on a team, but he has been on good teams and he's been around a lot of really great players. And so he was a good guy who was fun to be around for these young guys, and he could also take them under their wing. And it wasn't weird when he was offering advice because it felt like it came from a good place. And so he was great for this team. And he was great for the fans. It is absolutely no surprise to me that someone with his personality and the amount of swagger that he has endeared himself so much to the fans so quickly. And it's going to really leave a hole for the Jazz. I mean, there's no one like Jordan Clarkson.
Now, I'm going to ask you a follow-up, just like I did with Colin, and the answer could be exactly the same, and it's fine. But I am curious as to whether or not you're a bit surprised that the Jazz' only option with Jordan was essentially they cut him. I mean, it's a buyout situation where it saves the team some money. But are you surprised they couldn't get anything on the open market for Jordan Clarkson?
No, I'm not super surprised. I know that they tried to move him, at least last year and weren't able to get some. I think that the thing is like, do you want to take on another contract and possibly give up maybe a second or any kind of pick to attach to him when what you really want is money off the books and to keep the rest of your assets? I mean, I think that it makes a little bit more sense when you're looking at Colin because there was more money involved there. And they were able to get a backup center in the process. But for Jordan, I think that it made a lot of sense to just like cut ties and just give him a chance to go sign with someone else who wants him. And for those teams who, I think the Knicks are going to be putting him on a vet minimum this year, which is basically the amount of money that he gave up in the buyout. And so he doesn't lose money this year. The Jazz save a little bit of money and get his contract off the books. I think that this is kind of a win-win in a bit of a lose-lose situation, if that makes sense.
It does. So as I talk about all the time, when it comes to teams that are in the spot the Jazz are in, there is a salary floor that you have to hit. Everyone talks about the second apron, the salary cap, the luxury tax. Well, you also have to spend a minimum amount of money on your roster, and this year's salary floor is just about $140 million. If my numbers in front of me are correct, the Jazz are at $150.6 million right now, which leads us to John Collins. Now, any transaction, they'll bring money back. My point is, John just might be a guy that you're fine paying for one more year. It doesn't necessarily distract or dissuade you from what you're trying to accomplish this season, but more noise around John Collins potentially being moved off of by the Utah Jazz. Any insight on what's next for the Jazz and John?
I know that the Jazz have been working to move off of him to find a trade partner. So far, it's been hard for them to find something that nets them a positive result. Looking at the same thing as Colin Sexton, right? No one was going to give the Jazz good things to take on a contract that they didn't want anymore. And so they had to add a second. And so then that's kind of a negative net, right? You got to give up something to get it. And that's not really what the Jazz wanted to do with John, considering how much he kind of revamped his offensive game. That being said, the league still knows that he's not really a great defensive player, and he didn't really show that he was much better with the Jazz. It's hard to show that you're a great defensive player when you're on a team that is the worst defensive team. So I think that it's been difficult. That being said, if he ends up being a player they keep and tell him he doesn't have to report, if they want to buy him out, that's a possibility too. They could also keep him around. The Jazz are not opposed to just letting John Collins' deal expiring, because once you've got, John Collins, Colin Sexton, or Yusuf Nurkic now, Jordan Clarkson, the money off the books for all of those, contracts at the end of this upcoming season, that gives them a lot of wiggle room and a lot of cap space. And so I think that you're right. If he ends up being here, I think that they can maneuver around that. But they've still got options to go, and maybe they'll be able to pull something together and find a trade partner before the end of the offseason.
I know we've discussed this, but it's been a minute, so I'm just going to bring up the two names that, feel like they're very good players, but do they fit the timeline? And it's weird to say that about Walker Kessler, but, I'll ask you whether or not you have any recent intel on the Jazz potentially fielding phone calls on either Walker or Lowry. I talk about this now every day. Now that Austin is in charge, he's not married to any of these guys. Didn't draft him, didn't trade for him. Like I said, I have nothing but good things to say about both these players. I think they both have played well here, but your thoughts on the potential of the Jazz doing anything at all with either Lowry or Walker?
Yeah, I think that, if you asked me the same question maybe a year ago, I'd had a little bit of a different answer. At that point, it'd be like, these are the guys that it's going to be really hard to take out of the Jazz's hands. They want to keep them. I'm a little bit still in that camp, but I think that now the way that I've changed is, at this point, it feels like it's kind of 50-50. If the right deal comes along and someone sweetens the pot for the Jazz in a way that makes it hard to say no, you're right. Austin is not married to this situation. He didn't pick these guys. He didn't make those deals. And if they get something that looks better for the future, then they're going to do it. That being said, I know that the Jazz, the front office, everyone involved, they would love for Lowry and Walker to be a part of the future. They would love for them to turn into two of those building blocks and be a part of the next core of a great Jazz team. But they are not guaranteed, and they will be listening to phone calls that come in.
All right, before I set you loose, I think an interesting dynamic of this season, and I just talked about this with a couple of the NBA guests we've had on today, Taylor Hendricks, Cody Williams, Keontae George, Bryce Sensabaugh, and Isaiah Collier all have contracts which are team options next year. So it could be, I'm not saying it will be, and I have no insight here, but it could be the final year for these players if the Jazz have done their calculation on them and have decided it's not going to work. It's rare this happens, but it is something we're talking about. So of those 5 players, Taylor Hendricks, Cody Williams, Keontae George, Bryce Sensabaugh, Isaiah Collier, all playing on contracts this year that could be a situation where the team doesn't pick it up next year. What are your thoughts on the calculations that have been done on those 5?
I mean, I fully wouldn't expect that to be the case for Taylor or Cody because I don't think that there's been enough calculation at all. I think that you want as much time looking at those guys as you can possibly get because both of them came in looking like Bambi, right? Like skinny, a little bit like wonky-eyed, not knowing where to go at times, and just the first summer after their rookie seasons were so important. This one for Cody, last season for Taylor, and the unfortunate injury that Taylor gets then sets him back a year. So I just don't think that you've had enough time to look at Taylor, to look at Cody, and to know what you're going to be getting out of those players. For Isaiah, for Keontae, for any of the other young guys that, Bryce, anybody else we might be talking about, it's difficult. I think that this summer is really, really important for all of them. I would kind of be surprised if the Jazz decided to just make this upcoming season their last season. A lot of them have, these player options have to be decided a year in advance, right? And so this summer, the player or the team options, it's not about this upcoming season, it's about the following season. And so I would be really surprised if they didn't at least keep a hold of everyone through this season and the next season to get a full, clear picture of what they have in those players. But yeah, this summer is really, really important. If guys look like they're disinterested or they haven't improved or any of those things, hard decisions are coming.
Yeah, there's no doubt. All right, Sarah, it's been too long. Thanks so much for the time. Keep up the great work, and we'll chat soon, okay?
Yeah, anytime, Spence.
All right, our friend Sarah Todd from the Deseret News. She also has covered the 76ers and the Warriors. She's been doing it at a very high level. She's won Utah Sports Writer of the Year a couple of different times, most recently last year. She's on Twitter at NBA Sarah is where you find her. All right, I got 3 hours in the books. We got 1 hour to go. Final hour of the program comes your way next. We have some college football to do with Kyle Bonagura, the latest on Jake Retzlaff and BYU. University of Utah locked in a recruit today. We'll tell you about that and the latest on day 2 of NBA free agency. Final hour of the program comes your way next right here on ESPN 700, 92 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. All right, let's get it. Drive at 5 time Tuesday afternoon style. About 7 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock. Dog days of summer, man. It's about 98 degrees and sunny outside. But as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic. Porter Larson producing the program behind the glass. Day 2 of NBA free agency rolls along. All is quiet on the Western Front concerning the Utah Jazz. NHL free agency started today. The Utah Mammoth made a few different moves. We'll kind of tell you about that coming up in just a little bit. As a busy show has kind of transpired today, we're going to bring in Kyle Bonagura for some college football. The latest on the Jake Retzlaff situation for BYU, who could play quarterback for them, and kind of how that whole thing unfolded. Kyle was on the coverage for the story along with Pete Thamel for ESPN. So we'll bring that to you coming up in a bit. 5 o'clock hour of the program tonight is brought to you by Outlaw Distillery, a new partner here on the ESPN Sports Network. Outlaw Distillery is a homegrown, grain-to-glass, nitty-gritty whiskey, vodka, rum, and moonshine distillery right here in Salt Lake County. Outlaw Distillery is Utah-grown. So much history here of cowboys, outlaws, mining, and more. They have everything on the spirit spectrum, from their spiced rum, their vanilla bean rum, outlaw coffee rum, honey bourbon, barrel-proof whiskey, vodka, and moonshine. They have it all, and they're embracing the outlaw name by being rebellious and making some very unique spirits that aren't being seen or created by any other distilleries in Utah. We're happy to have them on board. So if you want to try their spirits, you can find their bottles in local liquor stores, or you can also book a tasting. You can tell them I sent you. The tour is about an hour and a half, and you get to try all their spirits and keep your shot glass as a souvenir. Get your tour and tasting booked at outlawdistillery.com today. Their doors opened in 2015, only the 4th distillery in the great state of Utah, deeply rooted in Utah history. Even the name Outlaw is inspired by legendary characters such as Butch Cassidy and the Outlaw Trail, which served as a primary transportation route for many of the notorious Wild West outlaws. The vision for Outlaw Distillery is clear. You can help show the world that some of the best spirits can come from one of the least expected places, namely here in Utah. So, as I referenced, no moves made today by the Utah Jazz, and as we just discussed with our friend Sarah Todd, there's potential that there may not be any other moves made by the Jazz. The salary floor for pro basketball this year is $139 million and change, just under 140, and the Jazz right now are at 150, so they are compliant. Now, if they move on from John Collins, they'll have to bring some salary back, but the deals that they've made so far have been very, very clearly motivated by one thing, and that's opening up playing time for namely these young guards, okay? So Colin Sexton has been moved to the Charlotte Hornets. They had to attach a second-round pick to Colin to bring back Yusuf Nurkic, who they just have no use for, just like Drew Eubanks, who was brought in last year. I mean, if they're going to hold on to Walker Kessler, I suppose Yusuf Nurkic is a veteran player that you don't really feel pressure to play. And I think Colin probably wanted to move on and play for a team that wasn't necessarily looking to play a bunch of young guards, and he's done that with the Charlotte Hornets. The reports are that Jordan Clarkson, who essentially was cut, I mean, that's kind of what this was, more or less waived. The buyout saves the Jazz a little bit of money. Reports are that Jordan Clarkson, after a really successful stint here with the Utah Jazz and the only holdover from the prior iteration with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert and that entire group, looks like he's going to sign with the New York Knicks to give them a little scoring punch off the bench. Still a lot of rumors surrounding John Collins potentially on the move. The Lakers have to do something, and we'll see if Collins could be in the mix there. Larry Marketing, Walker Kessler, some of the other names that you've heard about. I'm not sure how it's going to look. But one of the dynamics to keep in mind for Jazz basketball during the season is the following players are technically entering what could be the final year of their deals. Now, it's pretty rare. We talked about this with Smitty earlier. Local name that you'll recognize that did not have his third-year option picked up was Jimmer Fredette by the Sacramento Kings. After just a couple of years, the Kings did their calculation on Jimmer and said, we don't think he's an NBA player. But that's rare, especially for a lottery pick like Fredette or a top 10 pick like Hendricks or Cody Williams. But Taylor Hendricks, Cody Williams, Keontae George, Bryce Sensabaugh, Isaiah Collier, all 5 of those players have team options at the end of next season. So this is a big year for these young players. And what Austin Ainge has clearly indicated is that he is going to open up minutes for Will Hardy to play these young players. And then we'll kind of see how it goes. So no moves made today by the Utah Jazz. If you're just hopping in your car and turning on your radio, some moves of note have been made today. Namely, the Milwaukee Bucks have waived Damian Lillard. And they've used what's called a stretch provision in the NBA, which essentially means Dame is going to get all $113 million of his money. He can go back home to Portland and rehab and then choose his next destination, whether it's the Lakers, if he wants to go back home. I don't know if it's the final act of Dame Lillard's career, one of the best to ever do it here locally up at Weber State. But the money is about $22 to $23 million on Milwaukee's books over the next 5 years. That's why they call it a stretch provision. And with the flexibility they were able to get by utilizing this mechanism that you have in the NBA, the Milwaukee Bucks were able to acquire Miles Turner, who played in Game 7 of the NBA Finals for the Pacers 10 days ago. You don't see stuff like this happen very often. It's been kind of a big piece of coverage throughout the course of NBA media today. Dennis Lindsey and the Detroit Pistons continue to make moves. Duncan Robinson has signed a 3-year, $48 million deal with the Pistons. Our old buddy Drew Eubanks has been waived. He's going to land in Sacramento. The Denver Nuggets are being applauded for what they've done so far. Most recently, they have agreed to a 1-year deal with Tim Hardaway Jr., who will just be a bit rotational piece, maybe their 9th or 10th man. Yesterday, they trade Michael Porter Jr. and an unprotected first-round pick. I believe that's in 2031 or 2032. Goes to Brooklyn, and Cam Johnson is now a Denver Nugget. Cam Johnson and Michael Porter Jr. are pretty similar players. So Michael Porter Jr., unprotected first, goes to Brooklyn, and Cam Johnson lands with the Denver Nuggets. The Denver Nuggets also traded Dario Saric in exchange for Jonas Valanciunas, which is a good backup center for Nikola Jokic, which is something they haven't had in quite some time. So a bevy of moves made today. Bevy of moves have been made today. None have involved the Utah Jazz. The Houston Rockets continue to stockpile assets and players for a season next year where most people believe they have firmly entrenched themselves as the second best team in the West. Vegas agrees to that as well. So you have to look at Houston. I do think you have to look at Denver because they have Nikola Jokic. Everybody is chasing Oklahoma City. There's no doubt about that. The Cavs made a deal where they acquired Lonzo Ball from Chicago. Isaac Okoro is now a Chicago Bull. That took place yesterday. So a lot of rumors continue to surround what could happen with the Jazz, but nothing official took place today. The Atlanta Hawks are in the midst of a roster rebuild construct, and a lot of people applauding what they're doing. Quinn Snyder, of course, former Jazzman, as their head coach. Atlanta will bring in Luke Kennard from Memphis. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who actually played for Quinn here in Utah but could not get off the bench, had a really good couple-year stint in Minnesota. He's parlayed that into a 4-year, $53 million contract to go play for the Atlanta Hawks. And, of course, last week they made a deal to acquire Kristaps Porzingis from the Boston Celtics. And as long as Porzingis is healthy, he is entering the final year of his deal, and players are a little bit more motivated to play harder when a contract is on the line. Bruce Brown has also been brought back to the Denver Nuggets. He was a key part of their championships team in 2023. Last year was with the Raptors and the Pelicans. So a bevy of moves. D'Angelo Russell is a Dallas Maverick, giving Dallas their point guard while Kyrie Irving gets healthy. A lot of people thought Dallas would potentially look at Colin Sexton, but that's not how this went down. All of the rookies will be available for Summer League. And as we've discussed all day, if you're a Jazz fan, get ready to see these young players play. Summer League's a lot of fun. It's an affordable way to watch NBA basketball, and it's a way to get to know some of these young players. Jakob Poeltl, former Ute, signed the richest contract that any college player has ever signed who played his college ball here in the state of Utah. $104 million extension from the Raptors and Jakob Poeltl. So this has been an unprecedented amount of movement. It is kind of the new deal with the NBA. And eventually you have to hope that it's good news for the Jazz because all these teams can kind of recalibrate, and hopefully in a few years when some of these young players have developed, the Jazz will be in a spot where they can recalibrate and actually get in the game as opposed to being certainly one of the worst teams in the league. Kelvin Obat is the new Utah recruit that was announced today. It's for 2026. He's one of the best offensive linemen in the country, according to both the ESPN and 247 Sports rankings. Obat had offers from Michigan, Oregon, and Nebraska, and chose the University of Utah. So good news for Ute fans today, waiting for, obviously, more news on the 2026 class. I think that brings Utah to 14 players in the 2026 class. BYU picked another good recruit up today from the 2026 class, and after doing that, they moved into the top 25 of 2026 rankings. But we have an entire season ahead of us before we can analyze that. All right, Kyle Bonagura, more Big 12 football. We'll do some BYU, some Utah, latest on Jake Retzlaff and BYU. So Kyle will join us coming up on the other side of a Tuesday Drive right here on ESPN 700. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander got paid today. It's the richest contract in NBA history. Only 11th player in NBA history to win regular season MVP, finals MVP, and an NBA championship. $285 million. A Supermax extension for the reigning MVP. A ton of news coming in fast and furious. We tried to cover it as much as we possibly could on the program today. We'll see if the Utah Jazz do anything at all. There is a world that exists that they don't do anything else. They don't have to. They've got the rookies under contract. They've got some vets under contract. And this roster as presently constituted with the minutes that have been cleared up for the young players. Seems like it could be exactly what you need to back up Austin Ainge's assertion that they will not be manipulating minutes, but also be bad enough that you hold on to that number 8 pick in the draft next year. So there you go. Man, it's wild to pull up the headline and see that Damian Lillard has been waived by an NBA team. It's just weird. I mean, I get the dynamic, and it could ultimately be good news for Dame. But when they made this trade 2 years ago, people truly believed that Milwaukee would be in the mix to win multiple NBA championships. And I get why you do it if you're Milwaukee. You have to take advantage of having Giannis on your roster. It's just injuries suck, man. It's too bad how this went down.
Yeah, obviously, you look back at when that deal was made, and there were big hopes for folks here, folks that are fans of Damian Lillard, and of course fans of Milwaukee Bucks, that that could produce a really, really good little, I guess, extra run on top of what was a title run for Milwaukee. But I mean, when you combine an Achilles tear with a NBA guard, there's a lot of complications there. So unfortunately for one Damian Lillard, probably not going to see him next year. And if we do, it'll be like a buyout real late, or not a buyout, but joining a team real late in the year, or even for a postseason run. I would say you're more likely to see him join a team on a 1 or 2 year deal the season following. We will see how that all goes out, but hope the best for him, man. I hope where he lands is, as we've talked about, somewhere competitive. Seeing Damian Lillard in meaningful basketball is a lot of fun, and some of us have forgotten about that because it's been quite some time since we've seen him play in meaningful basketball.
The Utah Mammoth signed a Stanley Cup winner as Nate Schmidt is on his way to play for the Utah Mammoth, a 3-year deal, who just won a Stanley Cup with the Florida Panthers. The Winnipeg Jets bought out Schmidt when he was still on a 6-year contract that he signed when he was with the Vegas Golden Knights back in 2018. But yeah, most recently, he won a Stanley Cup, and that's always good. So after a 1-year deal, 33 years old, turned 34, will turn 34 next month. 3 goals, 12 points in 23 games to help the Panthers win a Stanley Cup. So some good stuff there. All right, Porter, before we get out of here, what comes our way in a Wednesday edition of the show?
On a Wednesday edition of the program, we'll talk NBA offseason. We'll talk a little bit of hockey, maybe a little bit of soccer as well. Tony Jones stops by the program. My buddy Everett Gray, former UNLV running Rebel, former NBA player, now local high school coach here, will stop by the program. Belle Frazier joins the show live from the development camp. Of course, Utah Mammoth, they're up in Park City for the week, so Belle will give us the lowdown from there. And then I think we're catching up with Pablo Mastroeni on a Wednesday as well.
All right, good stuff. So enjoy that. Stay tuned for a Wednesday show. We'll say goodnight, and a special thank you to Kyle Bonagura, Tim McMahon, Richard Smith, and Sarah Todd. For any sound you may have missed today, go to the website, which is ESPN700sports.com. You can always take us on the go utilizing our mobile app, which is the ESPN 700 app, available in the App Store or the Google Play Store. And then finally, for what we do on our space every afternoon for 4 hours, check out the podcast page. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts. It's available wherever you get your shows. Subscribe, rate, review, say nice things in the comments. Give us all the stars. It helps. He's Porter. I'm Spence saying good night. Have a great Tuesday evening. Talk to you on a Wednesday.